Some stories entertain you, others stay with you. If you believe stories have the power to change how we see the world, subscribe and join this community. And don't forget to share this with someone who needs to hear it.
3,000 feet above the Mediterranean, Clara Bennett realizes her honeymoon prison has no walls, just armed guards and a husband who owns everything, including her. The former New York waitress thought marrying Adrian Volkov would save her dying father. She didn't know the price would be her freedom. Now, standing on an Amalfi Coast balcony while her powerful crime lord husband sleeps, she clutches a burner phone and fake passport, moments from the biggest mistake of her life, or her only chance at escape. If you love intense romance and dangerous choices, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The villa clung to the cliffside like a jewel in a crown, all white stone and endless glass, terraces cascading down toward the glittering Tyrrhenian Sea. Most brides would have called it paradise. Clara Bennett called it what it was, a beautiful cage with a 300-foot drop on one side and armed men on the other. She stood alone on the master bedroom's balcony, bare feet cold against marble, watching the pre-dawn sky bleed from black to deep purple. The silk nightgown Adrian had left on her pillow the night before clung to her skin in the humid coastal air. Everything he gave her was expensive, beautiful, carefully chosen. Everything except the one thing she actually wanted: her freedom. Behind her, through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see Adrian Volkov asleep in their bed. 6 feet 2 inches of dangerous elegance sprawled across Egyptian cotton sheets that probably cost more than her entire apartment back in Brooklyn. Even in sleep, he looked like what he was, a man accustomed to controlling everything around him. His dark hair fell across his forehead, softening features that were all sharp angles and aristocratic lines during his waking hours. In the dim light, he almost looked innocent. Clara knew better. She'd known better since the moment he'd walked into the diner where she worked, 3 months ago, and looked at her like she was something rare he intended to possess. She'd known better when he'd offered her $2 million to marry him, enough to pay for her father's experimental cancer treatment, and then some. She'd definitely known better when she'd said yes anyway, because what choice did a desperate woman really have? "You're thinking too loud." Adrian's voice, rough with sleep, made her jump. She turned to find him propped up on one elbow, watching her with those unsettling gray eyes that seemed to see straight through every defense she tried to build. "I couldn't sleep," she said, which was true enough. She hadn't slept properly since their wedding 4 days ago. "Come back to bed." It wasn't quite a command, but it wasn't quite a request either. That was Adrian's specialty, making suggestions that felt like orders, all while maintaining a veneer of civilized courtesy. "I'm watching the sunrise." "You're planning." He sat up fully, the sheet falling to his waist, revealing the lean muscle of his chest and the scars she'd discovered on their wedding night, a roadmap of violence across otherwise perfect skin. "I can always tell. You get this look in your eyes, like you're doing calculations." Clara forced herself to breathe normally, to keep her expression neutral. "What would I be planning?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out." Adrian rose from the bed with the fluid grace of a predator, crossing the room toward her. He moved like violence wrapped in expensive suits, controlled, precise, lethal. "You've been different since yesterday." Since yesterday, when she'd accidentally walked in on one of his business calls and heard him discuss the permanent removal of someone who'd made the mistake of skimming money from one of his operations. Since yesterday, when the charming, attentive husband she'd been trying to convince herself she could tolerate had spoken about murder with the same casual tone most people use to discuss dinner reservations. "I told you what you were marrying into," Adrian said, stopping just behind her. She could feel the heat of him, close but not touching. He was always careful about that. Never forcing, never pushing, always giving her the illusion of choice while making sure she understood there was really only one acceptable answer. "I was honest about my world." "You said you were an import-export." Clara kept her eyes on the horizon, where the sun was just beginning to touch the edge of the sea with fire. "I am. I import and export many things." His hand came to rest on the balcony railing beside hers, not trapping her but close enough to remind her of his presence. "I simply didn't specify all the details. You didn't ask. Because asking questions about a man like you seemed like a good way to end up at the bottom of a river." She felt rather than saw his smile. You're smarter than you pretend to be, Clara. It's one of the things I find most fascinating about you. Is that why you married me? Because you find me fascinating? She finally turned to look at him and immediately regretted it. In the growing light, with his guard down and his expression uncharacteristically open, Adrian Volkov was devastatingly beautiful. It would have been so much easier if he'd been the monster she wanted him to be, all brutality and ugliness. Instead, he was this: complicated, intelligent, occasionally tender, and absolutely terrifying in his total certainty that he could make her want this life. I married you, Adrian said slowly, because from the moment I saw you, I knew I would never want anyone else. Because you looked at me like I was just a man, not a name or a reputation or a bank account. Because you were kind to that elderly customer who could barely afford his coffee, and you didn't make him feel small for counting out exact change. Because you're real in a way that nothing else in my life has been real for a very long time. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to her, and it made everything worse. Clara had spent 3 months convincing herself that Adrian was simply a criminal who'd bought himself a wife the way he bought everything else, through money and power and the implicit threat of violence. She could hate that man. She could plan her escape from that man without guilt. But this man who looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life, who had indeed been honest about the broad strokes of what he was, even if he'd left out the bloody details, who had paid for her father's treatment without hesitation and visited him in the hospital, sitting for hours making small talk with a dying man because it mattered to her. This man was so much harder to hate. Your father called yesterday, Adrian said, changing the subject with the abruptness he employed when emotions came too close to the surface. While you were in the shower, he wanted to make sure you were happy. What did you tell him? That you were radiant, that the Amalfi Coast agreed with you, that I'd never seen you smile so much. Adrian's expression was unreadable. All the things a husband should say about his new bride on their honeymoon. All lies, you mean? Were they? He reached out, tucking a strand of her dark hair behind her ear with surprising gentleness. You smiled at dinner last night. You laughed when I told you about the time I accidentally insulted the Russian ambassador's wife. You've barely left this bed except to stand on balconies and contemplate the sea. That doesn't mean I'm happy. No, Adrian agreed. But it means you're not entirely miserable either, and that terrifies you, doesn't it? The possibility that you might actually come to enjoy this life, that you might come to enjoy me. Clara pulled away from his touch, wrapping her arms around herself. You bought me, Adrian, like a painting or a car or a piece of real estate. That's not the foundation for happiness. I offered you a choice. You made it. That wasn't a choice. That was extortion disguised as a proposal. Marry me, and I'll save your father's life. What was I supposed to say to that? You could have said no. Adrian's voice went flat, dangerous. You could have walked away, found another way. But you didn't. There was no other way. The treatment cost $2 million. I was working double shifts at a diner, making maybe $40,000 a year if I was lucky. I would have needed 50 years to save that much money, and my father had 6 months to live. So you made a practical decision, an intelligent one, actually. You traded something you had, yourself, for something you needed, his survival. There's no shame in that, Clara. It's how the world works. Not my world, she said fiercely. In my world, people don't buy other people. In my world, marriages are about love, not transactions. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his expression impossible to read in the growing light. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. And if I told you that for me, it was never about a transaction, that from the moment I met you, I knew I would do whatever it took to make you mine, and the money was simply the only currency I had that you would accept? Clara's breath caught. Don't. Don't what? Don't try to make this into some kind of romantic fairy tale. You're not a prince, Adrian. You're a criminal, and I'm not Cinderella. I'm just a woman who sold herself to save her father's life, and now I have to live with that choice every single day. The words hung between them like a blade, sharp and cutting. Adrian's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek, and for a moment Clara thought she might have finally pushed him too far. But when he spoke, his voice remained eerily calm. Get dressed. Something comfortable. Why? Because I'm going to show you exactly what you sold yourself into. No more illusions, Clara. No more carefully curated version of my life. You want the truth? You're going to get it. 2 hours later, Clara sat in the passenger seat of a sleek black Mercedes, watching the Amalfi Coast blur past her window as Adrian drove with the same precise control he brought to everything else. He'd been silent since they left the villa, his focus entirely on the winding coastal road. In the back seat, Marcus, Adrian's head of security, a mountain of a man with ice-blue eyes and a perpetual expression of professional menace, made occasional phone calls in a language Clara didn't recognize. She dressed in jeans and a simple white blouse, pulling her long dark hair into a practical ponytail. Adrian had changed into dark slacks and a charcoal shirt, expensive but understated. He looked like what he claimed to be on tax forms, a successful international businessman. Only the slight bulge under his left arm suggested otherwise. "Where are we going?" Clara asked finally, unable to bear the silence any longer. "Naples." Adrian didn't take his eyes off the road. "One of my warehouses. There's something I need to handle, and you're going to watch." "Why?" "Because you asked for the truth. Because you deserve to understand exactly what your $2 million bought you." He glanced at her briefly, his expression unreadable behind designer sunglasses. "Because I'm tired of you looking at me like I'm a monster you barely know. If you're going to hate me, Clara, you should at least hate me for who I actually am, not who you imagine me to be." They drove through villages of pastel houses clinging to cliffsides, past groves of lemon trees and ancient churches, through landscapes so beautiful it hurt to look at. Clara had imagined Italy differently before this trip, as a place of romance and art and endless history. Instead, it had become the backdrop for her own personal imprisonment, its beauty only making the cage feel more surreal. When they finally reached Naples, Adrian navigated through increasingly industrial areas until they arrived at a nondescript warehouse near the port. From the outside, it looked like any other commercial building. Concrete walls, a few small windows, a large rolling door for loading trucks. Nothing to suggest it was anything other than legitimate business. 2 men stood guard outside, both armed, both wearing the kind of carefully blank expressions that suggested they'd seen things that would give normal people nightmares. They straightened when they saw Adrian's car, one of them speaking quickly into a radio. "Stay close to me," Adrian said as he killed the engine. "Don't speak unless I tell you to. Don't react to anything you see. Can you do that?" Clara nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. This was what she'd asked for, wasn't it? The truth, the reality behind the beautiful lies of their honeymoon villa. Inside, the warehouse was exactly what Clara had expected, and nothing like it at the same time. The main floor was filled with legitimate cargo, crates stamped with shipping labels, pallets wrapped in plastic, forklifts sitting idle. But Adrian led her past all of that, through a door in the back, down a flight of stairs, into a basement that definitely didn't appear on any official building plans. The space below was larger than it should have been, extending under the neighboring buildings. Clearly, this was where the real business happened. Clara saw money-counting machines, dozens of sealed packages, what looked like surveillance equipment. And in the center of it all, tied to a chair with blood on his face and terror in his eyes, sat a man who couldn't have been more than 30. Mr. Volkov. The man who greeted them was older, maybe 50, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades doing things he wouldn't discuss in polite company. "Everything is ready, as you requested." "Thank you, Dmitri." Adrian's hand found the small of Clara's back, guiding her to a position against the far wall where she'd have a clear view of everything. "Clara, this is Dmitri Kozlov, my operations manager for southern Italy. Dmitri, my wife." Dmitri's eyebrows rose fractionally, the only sign of surprise at her presence, but he recovered quickly, offering a slight bow. "Mrs. Volkov. An honor." Clara couldn't find words, so she just nodded. Adrian crossed to the bound man, crouching down to eye level with an almost gentle expression. "Paolo, do you know why you're here?" "Mr. Volkov, please, I can explain." Paolo's words tumbled out in accented English, thick with panic and pain. "It was just once. I swear I was going to pay it back." "How much did you take?" Adrian's voice remained conversational, almost kind. Somehow, that made it worse. 20,000 euros, but I have half of it already. I can get you the rest by next week, I promise." "You stole from me, Paolo. 20,000 euros over the course of 6 months, thinking I wouldn't notice. thinking you were smarter than my accountants, more clever than my systems. Adrian stood, walking slowly around the chair. The amount doesn't matter. What matters is that you broke the only rule that really counts in my organization: loyalty. I'm loyal. I've worked for you for 3 years. You've never gotten caught before, Adrian corrected. There's a difference. Loyalty means when your mother gets sick and you need money for her treatment, you come to me. You ask. And I help you, because that's what I do for the people who work for me. I take care of them. But instead you decided to steal from me, to treat me like I'm too stupid to notice or too weak to do anything about it. Paolo's eyes darted around the room, landing on Clara for just a moment before Adrian snapped his fingers, drawing the man's attention back. Don't look at her. Look at me. Adrian's voice remained eerily calm. I want you to understand something, Paolo. I brought my wife here today because she needed to see this, to understand how my world works. So what happens next? That's not just about you. It's about every other person in my organization who might be tempted to make the same mistake you made. It's about making sure everyone understands what happens when you betray my trust. Clara's heart pounded so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She wanted to close her eyes, to look away, to run back up those stairs and out into the sunlight. But Adrian had told her not to react, and some instinct told her that showing weakness now would be worse than whatever was about to happen. Adrian pulled out his phone, tapping the screen a few times before holding it up so Paolo could see. Your mother. Rosa, yes? Currently staying at the Villa Rosa care facility in Sorrento. Stage 3 cancer, I believe. Very expensive treatment. The blood drained from Paolo's face. Please, she's got nothing to do with this. I know, which is why I've already arranged for her care to be fully covered. For the rest of her life, Paolo. Every treatment, every medication, every comfort she needs. Because despite what you seem to think, I'm not a monster. Adrian pocketed his phone. I don't punish innocent people for the sins of their family members. Paolo started crying, great heaving sobs of relief and terror all tangled together. Thank you, Mr. Volkov. I'm not finished. Adrian's voice cut through the sobbing like a knife. Your mother will be cared for. But you? You're going to disappear, Paolo. Tomorrow, the police will find evidence that you've been skimming from several criminal organizations, not just mine. Russians, Albanians, even the Camorra. You'll be wanted by everyone, trusted by no one. If you're smart, you'll leave Italy tonight and never come back. If you're very smart, you'll leave Europe entirely. Because if I ever see you again, if you ever try to contact anyone in my organization, if you ever speak my name out loud where the wrong people might hear it, that protection I just offered your mother goes away. Do you understand? Yes. Yes, I understand. I'll leave tonight, I swear. Dmitri will give you 50,000 euros. Consider it severance pay. Use it to start over somewhere far from here. Adrian turned away dismissively. Get him out of my sight. 2 men appeared from the shadows, cutting Paolo's bonds and hauling him to his feet. He stumbled, still crying, stammering out thanks and promises as they escorted him toward the stairs. When they were gone, Clara finally released the breath she'd been holding. You let him go? Yes. I thought you were going to kill him. Adrian turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. Did you? And what did you think of me, watching you think that? Clara didn't know how to answer because the truth was complicated and messy and made her feel things she didn't want to feel. She had thought he was going to kill Paolo. She'd been prepared for blood and violence and confirmation of every dark suspicion she'd harbored about the man she'd married. Instead, she'd witnessed something far more complex. A man who punished betrayal, but not with the brutality she'd expected. A man who made sure a sick woman would be cared for even as he exiled her son. A man who inspired terror, but wielded it with precision rather than rage. I don't know what to think, she admitted finally. Honest, I appreciate that. Adrian gestured to Dmitri. Show her the rest. For the next hour, Claire received an education in the business of Adrian Volkov. Dmitri walked her through the warehouse's operations with the matter-of-fact professionalism of a museum guide, explaining how they moved goods across Europe, how they laundered money through legitimate businesses, how they maintained relationships with corrupt officials and law enforcement. He showed her the security systems, the emergency protocols, The careful records they kept of everything despite the illegal nature of their work. Mr. Volkov believes in order, Dmitri explained, as they stood in front of a wall of monitors showing various warehouse locations across southern Italy. Many people in our line of work, they operate on chaos and fear. But Mr. Volkov, he builds systems, he creates structure. People work for him because he pays well, he protects his people, and he keeps his word. Is it legal? No, but it is reliable. And in our world, reliability is worth more than gold. Why are you telling me this? Clara asked. Dmitri smiled slightly. Because Mr. Volkov asked me to help you understand, and because you are his wife. Whether you like it or not, Mrs. Volkov, you are part of this now. Better that you know what you are part of. When they finally emerged back into the sunlight, Clara felt like she'd aged a year in a single morning. Adrian was waiting by the car, speaking quietly on his phone. He ended the call when he saw them, his eyes immediately finding Clara's face, searching for something. Well, he said. Well, what? Are you going to faint? Scream? Run? There was something almost vulnerable in the question, hidden beneath the casual tone. No. Clara walked to the car, waiting for him to unlock it. I'm going to think, which I'm sure you'll find just as concerning. The ghost of a smile touched Adrian's lips. Probably more so. They drove back in silence, but it was a different kind of quiet than the morning's tension. Clara stared out the window, watching the landscape blur past, trying to reconcile everything she'd just witnessed with the simple narrative she'd been telling herself. Adrian was a criminal. That part was still true. But he wasn't the mindless brute she'd needed him to be. He was intelligent, organized, and possessed of a strange code that balanced brutality with unexpected mercy. It didn't make what he did right. It didn't change the fact that he'd essentially bought her. But it made him human in a way that was deeply inconvenient for her plans, because Clara had a secret that Adrian didn't know. Hidden in her toiletries bag back at the villa, wrapped in a tampon box that no one would ever think to search, was a fake passport, 5,000 euros in cash, and a burner phone with exactly one number programmed into it, a contact who could get her out of Italy and off Adrian's radar permanently. She'd spent the last 2 months setting it up, making plans during bathroom breaks at her father's hospital, quietly selling the jewelry Adrian had given her during their brief courtship, building an escape route one tiny piece at a time. Tomorrow night, while Adrian was in Rome for a business meeting, she was supposed to run. A car would pick her up at midnight. By dawn, she'd be in Switzerland. By next week, she'd have a new name and a new life, far from the beautiful prison Adrian had built around her. That was still the plan. It had to be. Didn't it? Back at the villa, Adrian disappeared into his office for a series of phone calls while Clara retreated to the bedroom, her mind churning. She stood on the balcony again, watching the sun beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. You're thinking again. Clara turned to find Adrian in the doorway, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up, looking tired in a way she'd never seen him look before. You showed me all of that, she said. Why? Because you asked for the truth. No, I mean, why did you really show me? You could have just let me keep my illusions. Let me think you were a simple monster. It would have been easier for both of us. Adrian crossed to the balcony, leaning against the railing beside her. Would it? I don't think so. I think you're the kind of woman who picks at threads until the whole tapestry unravels. Better to show you the pattern myself than let you discover it piece by piece and fill in the blanks with your worst imaginings. So now I'm supposed to what? Accept it? Be grateful that you're not as bad as I feared? You're supposed to make an informed decision. Adrian turned to look at her fully. You think I don't know you're planning something, Clara? You think I haven't noticed the way you've been cataloging exits, memorizing security patterns, testing how long you have alone? I know you. I've studied you for months. I know how your mind works. Clara's blood went cold. Then why haven't you stopped me? Because I want you to choose to stay. Not because you're trapped, but because you want to be here. His hand covered hers on the railing, warm and solid. I can lock you in this villa. I can put guards on you 24 hours a day. I can take away your phone, your money, every possible means of escape. And you would still leave me, Clara. Maybe not physically, but in every way that actually matters. You'd retreat inside yourself and I'd be married to a ghost. So what are you saying? I'm saying that tomorrow night, when you think I'm in Rome, I'll actually be right here. And when that car comes to pick you up at midnight, I won't stop it. I won't stop you." Adrian's voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him. There was fear there, carefully controlled but undeniably present. "You can leave. Take your new passport and your cash and your carefully laid plans. Walk away from this life, from me, from everything. I won't hunt you down. I won't drag you back. I'll let you go." Clara stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. "Why?" "Because I love you." The words fell between them like stones. "Because I've loved you since the moment you smiled at me in that diner, and I realized I'd never seen anything more beautiful in my entire life. Because I would rather lose you and know you're free than keep you here and watch you wither. Because you deserve the choice I never gave you when I offered you that devil's bargain. Adrian, but I'm also going to ask you for something." He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Before you go, give me these next 24 hours. No locked doors, no guards watching your every move, just you and me here, talking honestly for the first time since we met. Let me show you who I really am, beyond the warehouse and the business and the reputation. And then, tomorrow night, you can decide. Stay or go. Either way, I'll live with your choice." Clara searched his face, looking for the lie, the manipulation, the angle he was working. But all she saw was a man who'd built an empire on control finally admitting he couldn't control the one thing he wanted most. "One day," she said slowly, "and you really won't stop me from leaving?" "I really won't." "And my father's treatment, if I leave?" "Will continue exactly as planned. I'll make sure he has everything he needs for as long as he lives. You have my word, Clara. And whatever else I am, I keep my word." She believed him. That was the terrifying part. After everything, after the coercion and the manipulation and the casual displays of power, she actually believed that Adrian Volkov would let her walk away, which meant the only question left was whether she wanted to. "Okay," Clara heard herself say. 24 hours. And then I decide." Adrian's relief was visible, tension draining from his shoulders. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles with old-world formality. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. You might not like what I decide." "Perhaps. But at least it will be your decision. And that, Clara, that's worth everything." As the sun set over the Amalfi coast, painting their world in shades of fire and gold, Clara stood on the balcony with her husband's hand in hers and wondered which version of her future she was about to choose. The safe one, where she escaped back to her old life, free but forever looking over her shoulder. Or the dangerous one, where she stayed in this beautiful cage with a man who terrified and fascinated her in equal measure and tried to build something real from the ruins of their devil's bargain. 24 hours to decide. 24 hours to figure out who she really was and what she really wanted. 24 hours to choose between freedom and something she was afraid to call love, but might be anyway. The clock was ticking. That evening, they had dinner on the terrace under strings of lights that turned the night into something from a dream. Adrian had dismissed the staff, insisting on cooking himself, a fact that surprised Clara until she tasted the pasta he'd made from scratch, the sauce rich with tomatoes and basil from the villa's garden. "You cook," she said, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. "My grandmother taught me. She believed that a man who couldn't feed himself was barely a man at all." Adrian poured wine into her glass, the movement easy and practiced. "She raised me after my parents died. In a small village in Russia, nothing like this." He gestured to the opulent villa around them. "We had one room, a hot plate, and her fierce determination that I would be better than the life we had." Clara took a sip of wine, studying him in the candlelight. This was a version of Adrian she'd never seen before. Relaxed, almost casual, speaking about his past without the careful control he usually maintained. "How did they die?" "Your parents." "Car accident." Or that's what the official report said. Adrian's expression darkened slightly. "I was 8, old enough to know that the men who came to offer their condolences to my grandmother were the same men my father had owed money to. Old enough to understand that some accidents aren't accidents at all. I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was a long time ago. And it taught me something important, that in this world, you're either the one in control or the one being controlled. There's no middle ground." He met her eyes across the table. Until you. You're the first person who's ever made me question whether that's actually true. How do you mean? Adrian set down his fork, considering his words carefully. You don't try to control me. You don't manipulate or scheme or play the games that everyone else in my life plays constantly. You just are. Honest. Direct. Even when you're planning to run away from me, you're terrible at hiding it because deception doesn't come naturally to you. I don't know if that's a compliment or an insult. It's an observation, and it's why I fell in love with you, Clara. Because you're real in a way that nothing else in my life has been real for 20 years. Clara pushed food around her plate, her appetite fading. You keep saying you love me, but how can you? You barely know me. I know that you worked 3 jobs to support yourself and your father after your mother died. I know that you dropped out of college in your junior year because you couldn't afford both tuition and his medication. I know that you spent every Sunday reading to elderly patients at the nursing home near your apartment, even though you didn't get paid for it. I know that you're afraid of heights, but you live on the 5th floor because the rent is cheaper. I know that you take your coffee black because you developed the taste during night shifts when there was never any milk left. I know that you cry during sad movies, but you try to hide it. I know that you're stronger than you think you are, braver than you give yourself credit for, and kinder than this world deserves. Clara stared at him, her heart pounding. You investigated me. Thoroughly. Before I ever approached you. Adrian didn't look apologetic. I don't make investments without research, Clara. And you were the most important investment of my life. I'm not an investment. I'm a person. You're right. Poor choice of words. He reached across the table, his hand open, waiting. You're the person I want to spend my life with. The person I want to wake up next to every morning. The person I want to build something with that isn't about money or power or control. Just connection. Partnership. Love, if you'll let it be that. Clara looked at his outstretched hand, remembering all the times she'd taken it before, at their wedding, walking into restaurants, climbing out of cars. Each time it had felt like a small surrender, one more step into the cage he was building around her. But now, with his promise that she could leave hanging between them, the choice felt different. She placed her hand in his. Adrian's fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. And for a moment they just sat there in the candlelight, connected by nothing more than this simple touch and the weight of everything unsaid between them. Tell me about your father, Adrian said finally. Not the medical details. Tell me about who he is. So Clara did. She told him about her father's love of terrible puns, about how he'd raised her alone after her mother's death, about the way he'd taught her to play chess and to stand up for herself and to never apologize for taking up space in the world. She told him about the guilt she felt, that her father's pride in her independence had crumbled the moment she told him she was marrying a man she barely knew. She told him about the last conversation they'd had before the wedding, when her father had taken her hand and asked if she was sure, really sure, and she'd lied and said yes. He knows, Adrian said quietly, that you did this for him. He's not stupid, Clara. That makes it worse. He knows I sold myself to save him, and he has to live with that. What kind of daughter does that to her father? The kind who loves him enough to sacrifice her own happiness. That's not something to be ashamed of. Even when the sacrifice was marrying you? Adrian smiled, but there was sadness in it. Especially then, because you married a monster to save someone you love. That's not weakness, Clara. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen anyone do. After dinner, they walked down to the beach, Clara's hand still in Adrian's, their shoes left behind on the terrace. The sand was cool beneath her feet, the Mediterranean stretching out before them like a dark mirror reflecting stars. The villa's lights glowed behind them, but here on the beach, they could have been the only 2 people in the world. I need to tell you something, Clara said, stopping at the water's edge. And I need you to be honest with me when I ask you about it. Always. The phone call I overheard yesterday, about the man who was skimming money. You said he needed to be permanently removed. What did that mean? Adrian was quiet for a long moment, the waves filling the silence between them. It meant exactly what you think it meant. You had him killed. Yes. The word hung in the air, simple and terrible. Clara had expected him to deny it, to explain it away, to dress it up in euphemisms that would let her pretend it was something other than what it was. Instead, He'd given her the truth, stark and unvarnished. "Why?" she asked. "Paolo stole from you too, but you let him go. What was different?" "Paolo stole 20,000 euros because he was desperate and stupid. He had a sick mother and he panicked. The other man, Victor, he stole 3 million euros over the course of 2 years and used it to start his own competing operation. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he thought I wouldn't find out because he was smart enough to hide it. He was wrong. So you killed him." "I had him killed, yes. There's a difference. I don't do that work myself anymore, Clara. I haven't for years." Adrian turned to face her fully. "And before you ask, yes, I've killed people. With my own hands. When I was younger and climbing my way up, when violence was the only currency that mattered, I've done things that would horrify you, things I can never take back or make right. Things that wake me up at night sometimes, even now." Clara absorbed this, trying to reconcile the man who'd cooked her dinner and talked about his grandmother with the man who admitted to murder without flinching. "Do you regret it?" "Some of it. The unnecessary violence, the times I let anger make my decisions instead of logic. But the broader strokes? No. I built something from nothing, Clara. I took the beating my father took, the poverty my grandmother endured, the way the world treated us like we were disposable. I took all of that and I turned it into power, into an empire, into a life where no one will ever be able to hurt me or the people I care about again. And yes, I've killed to protect that. I'll kill again if I have to." "How can you say that so calmly?" "Because it's the truth. Because you asked for honesty, and this is what honesty looks like in my world." Adrian's voice remained steady. "I won't lie to you and pretend I'm something I'm not. I won't tell you I'm going to change who I fundamentally am, because I won't. This is who I am, Clara. A criminal, a killer, when circumstances demand it. A man who operates outside the law because the law was never designed to protect people like me. Like us, you mean? You've made me part of this now. Only if you choose to be. Tomorrow night you can walk away from all of this. You'll never be implicated in anything I do. I've made sure of that." Clara walked into the shallow water, letting the waves lap at her ankles, cold and bracing. "What if I can't live with what you do? What if I stay and it destroys me?" "Then you shouldn't stay." Adrian followed her into the water. "But I think you're stronger than you know. I think you're capable of living with moral complexity, with shades of gray instead of simple black and white. Because the truth is, Clara, the world you came from, the so-called legitimate world, it's not that different from mine. The rich get richer by exploiting the poor. Corporations kill people with pollution and unsafe working conditions and call it the cost of doing business. Politicians start wars for profit and call it patriotism. At least I'm honest about what I am. That doesn't make it right. No, but it doesn't make it wrong either. It just makes it reality." He moved closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of him despite the cool water. "I'm not asking you to approve of everything I do. I'm asking you to see me as a complete person, the good and the bad, the gentle and the violent, the man who loves you and the man who kills to protect what's his. And then decide if that's someone you can build a life with." Clara turned to face him, water swirling around their ankles, stars blazing overhead. "And if I decide I can't?" "Then I'll let you go. And I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I had something precious, and I lost it because I couldn't be anything other than what I am." Adrian's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "But I hope you'll stay. I hope you'll take a chance on this impossible thing between us. Because I think we could be extraordinary together, Clara. I think we could build something that's both honest and good, even if it exists outside the normal rules." "How? How can something built on what we have possibly be good?" "Because we choose to make it good. Because we're honest with each other, we protect each other, we build each other up instead of tearing each other down. Because love, real love, isn't about perfect circumstances or moral purity. It's about two people deciding that despite everything, despite all the reasons they shouldn't work, they're going to try anyway." Clara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision she had to make pressing down on her. Everything Adrian said made a terrible kind of sense. She'd been poor enough to understand that morality was a luxury most people couldn't afford. She'd seen enough of the world to know that the line between legal and illegal, right and wrong, was often arbitrary and always controlled by those with power. She knew that the pharmaceutical company charging $2 million for her father's treatment was engaged in its own form of violence, just one that society had decided to call acceptable. But knowing all of that intellectually was different from living it. From tying her life to a man who admitted he would kill again if necessary. From becoming complicit in an empire built on activities that destroyed lives, even if Adrian did it more humanely than most. "I need to think," she said, opening her eyes. "I know, that's what these 24 hours are for." Adrian lowered his hand but didn't step back. "Come on, there's something else I want to show you." They walked back to the villa, where Adrian led her to his office, a room she'd only glimpsed in passing before. He unlocked the door with a fingerprint scanner, revealing a space that was part library, part war room. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 2 walls, filled with everything from classic literature to business theory to what looked like philosophy texts. The other walls held maps, screens showing various security feeds, and a massive desk covered in papers and multiple computers. "This is where I actually work," Adrian said, watching her take it in, "when I'm not putting on shows for you or my employees or the various people I need to impress." Clara moved to the bookshelves, running her fingers along the spines. Dostoevsky, Machiavelli, Marcus Aurelius, Robert Greene, a strange mix of literature, philosophy, and strategy. "You read all of these?" "Most of them multiple times. My grandmother couldn't afford much, but she made sure I had access to the library. Books were how I educated myself when formal schooling wasn't an option." He pulled out a worn copy of Crime and Punishment. "This one I've probably read 20 times. Raskolnikov's theory about extraordinary people being above conventional morality. I used to think he was right, that I was one of those extraordinary people who could decide for himself what was moral. And now I think Dostoevsky had it right all along, that there's no escaping the weight of what we do, that even if we justify it perfectly in our minds, it still costs us something. Raskolnikov murdered for what he thought was a greater good, and it destroyed him from the inside." Adrian replaced the book carefully. "I've made my peace with what I do, Clara, but I won't pretend it doesn't cost me. It costs me sleep. It costs me the ability to trust easily. It costs me the kind of simple happiness that normal people take for granted." "Then why do it?" "Because it's the only life I know how to live. Because I built something that hundreds of people depend on for their livelihoods. Because walking away now would create a power vacuum that would get a lot of people killed." He moved to his desk, unlocking a drawer and pulling out a thick folder. "But I'm not my business, Clara. I'm also this." He handed her the folder. Inside, Clara found documents detailing charitable foundations, scholarships, medical funding for families who couldn't afford treatment, all funded anonymously through various shell corporations and trusts. The amounts were staggering, millions of euros distributed to hospitals, schools, refugee organizations, domestic violence shelters. "You do this?" Clara looked up at him in disbelief. "I make money from activities that destroy some lives. The least I can do is use that money to save others. It doesn't balance the scales, Clara. I'm not naive enough to think that. But it means something, at least to me." Clara sank into the leather chair behind his desk, still paging through the documents. Here was a scholarship fund for the children of incarcerated parents. Here was a grant program for small businesses in economically depressed areas. Here was a medical fund that looked remarkably similar to the one that had saved her father's life. "How many?" she asked quietly. "How many what?" "How many people like my father? People who needed expensive treatment they couldn't afford. How many did you help?" Adrian was quiet for a moment. "Last year, 43. This year we're on track for 50. Clara's hand shook slightly as she set down the folder. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I didn't want you to think it excused the rest. It doesn't. I do good things, and I do terrible things, often in the same day. I save lives and I end them. I'm not a good man trying to justify his sins, Clara. I'm just a complicated man trying to do something meaningful with the power I've accumulated." She stood, moving to the window that overlooked the dark sea. Behind her reflection in the glass, she could see Adrian watching her, his expression guarded, waiting for her judgment. "My father used to say that people aren't simple," Clara said softly. "That everyone is capable of both good and evil, and what matters is which one we choose in any given moment. I always thought that was too forgiving. that there were good people and bad people, and you could tell which was which by their actions. And now? Now I'm standing in the office of a man who has people killed and also pays for cancer treatment for strangers. A man who coerced me into marriage and also gave me the choice to leave. A man who scares me and fascinates me and makes me question everything I thought I knew about right and wrong. She turned to face him. I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything with it tonight. You just have to sit with it. Let yourself feel whatever you feel without trying to force it into a simple category. Adrian moved closer, but still maintaining that careful distance, never crowding her. I'm not going to try to convince you to stay, Clara. I'm not going to seduce you or manipulate you or make promises about changing into someone I'm not. I'm just going to be honest with you. And tomorrow night, you'll make your choice based on who I actually am, not who either of us wishes I could be. They stood there in the quiet office, the only sound the distant crash of waves against the cliffs, and Clara felt something shift inside her. Not a decision, not yet, but a softening, a recognition that the world she'd believed in, where people were simply good or bad, where choices were clear and morality was straightforward, had never really existed, and that maybe, just maybe, there was something brave in choosing to live in the messy reality instead of retreating into comfortable illusions. Tell me about the people who work for you, she said. The ones who aren't criminals by choice. The ones who are just trying to survive. So Adrian did. He told her about the refugees he employed in his warehouses. People who couldn't get legitimate work because of their immigration status. He told her about the women he hired for his administrative staff, many of them escaping domestic violence with no other options. He told her about the families he supported, the educations he funded, the second chances he provided to people the legal world had discarded. He also told her about the violence, the rivals he'd eliminated, the law enforcement he'd corrupted, the systems he'd subverted. He didn't soften it or hide behind euphemisms. He gave her the raw truth of his empire, the blood and the money all mixed together until you couldn't separate one from the other. They talked through the night, moving from the office to the terrace to the bedroom, the conversation flowing without pause. Clara asked questions, and Adrian answered them, no matter how damning. She pushed, and he didn't retreat. She challenged, and he met her challenge with honesty that was sometimes uncomfortable but never dishonest. As dawn began to lighten the sky, they lay in bed fully clothed on top of the covers, exhausted but still talking, still trying to navigate this impossible space between them. What happened to your first love? Clara asked suddenly. It was a question she'd wondered about but never dared to voice. Adrian was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, her name was Irina. We grew up together in my grandmother's village. She was going to be a doctor. She was brilliant, kind, everything good about the world compressed into one person. What happened to her? She made the mistake of loving me. When I was 19 and stupid and thought I was invincible, I got involved with some very dangerous people, made enemies I didn't know how to handle. They came after me by going after her. Adrian's voice remained steady, but Clara could hear the old pain beneath it. She died because of me, because I was arrogant and reckless and thought I was smarter than I was. I'm sorry. It's why I am the way I am now. Why I'm so controlling, so careful about security, so determined to protect the people I care about at any cost. I won't make that mistake again, Clara. I won't let anyone I love be vulnerable because I failed to anticipate every threat. Clara rolled onto her side, studying his profile in the growing light. Is that why you have so many guards? Why you're so obsessive about knowing where I am? Yes, I know it feels like a cage, but to me, it's protection. It's making sure that what happened to Irina never happens to you. But you're giving me the choice to leave, even though it scares you. Because keeping you prisoner scares me more. Because I'd rather lose you to your own choice than watch you disappear inside yourself while you're still physically here. Adrian turned his head to look at her. And because you deserve better than a man who's too afraid of losing you to let you be free. The sun was fully up now, streaming through the windows, marking the beginning of Clara's last day to decide. They'd talked for nearly 12 hours straight, and she felt wrung out, exhausted, but also strangely clear-headed. This was who Adrian Volkov was. All the contradictions, all the complexity, all the good and bad tangled together until you couldn't separate them. The question was whether she could live with that, Whether she could build a life with a man who straddled the line between salvation and damnation, who did terrible things for complicated reasons, who loved her with an intensity that was both thrilling and terrifying. "I need to sleep," she said, "and then I need to think, alone." "Of course." Adrian sat up, preparing to leave. "Where are you going?" "To give you space. That's what you need, isn't it?" Clara surprised herself by reaching for his hand. "Stay. Just sleep next to me. No talking, no pressure. Just be here." Something vulnerable crossed Adrian's face, relief mixed with gratitude and a tenderness that made Clara's chest ache. He lay back down, maintaining a respectful distance, and they fell asleep as the sun climbed higher in the Italian sky. Two people on the edge of either beginning or ending, neither knowing which it would be. When Clara woke, it was early afternoon and she was alone. A note on the pillow next to her read, "I'll be in the garden when you're ready. No rush. Take all the time you need. A." She showered, dressed in a simple sundress, and stood on the balcony one more time, looking out at the view that had felt like a prison just days ago. Now it felt like something else. Not quite freedom, but not quite captivity either. Something in between, something without a name. Clara thought about her father, probably sitting in his hospital room right now, wondering if his daughter was happy. She thought about her old life, the tiny apartment, the exhausting work, the constant financial stress balanced against simple freedoms she'd taken for granted. She thought about the future she'd imagined running toward, quiet, safe, uncomplicated. And she thought about Adrian, about the way he looked at her like she was both precious and strong, about his honesty, even when it damned him, about the strange moral universe he inhabited, where killing and kindness coexisted without apparent contradiction. About the way her heart beat faster when he walked into a room, despite everything, despite all the very good reasons it shouldn't. She found him in the garden, tending to the herbs with surprising gentleness, his sleeves rolled up and dirt on his hands. He looked up when she approached, his expression carefully neutral, betraying nothing of what he hoped or feared. "I need to ask you something," Clara said, "and I need you to answer honestly. Always. If I stay, what happens? What does our life actually look like?" Adrian set down the gardening shears, giving her his full attention. "You would be my wife in every sense, my partner, my confidant. I would trust you with the truth about my business, but I wouldn't ask you to participate in anything that made you uncomfortable. You'd have access to all the money you'd ever need, but also the freedom to work if you wanted to pursue whatever interests or passions you have. We'd travel, we'd build a home together, we'd have children if you wanted them. And I would do everything in my power to make you happy. And if your world touches mine, if there's violence or danger, I protect you. That's non-negotiable. But I won't lie to you. Being married to me comes with risks. There are people who would hurt you to get to me. That's why the security, why the guards, why I need to know you're safe. Not because I don't trust you, but because I have enemies who wouldn't hesitate to use you against me. What about my father? He continues to get the best care available. And if you want to see him, we make that happen safely. We can bring him here if his health allows. We can visit him with proper security. Whatever you need." Clara sat down on the garden bench, her mind working through possibilities and consequences. "And if I leave, you take your new identity and disappear. I make sure your father is cared for. I don't follow you or contact you or try to find you. You build whatever life you want, completely free of me." Adrian's voice didn't waver, but she could see the cost of saying it in his eyes. "And I live with the fact that I had everything I ever wanted and let it slip through my fingers. Would you find someone else, eventually?" "No." The answer was immediate and certain. "There won't be anyone else, Clara. Not ever. You're it for me." She believed him. That was the thing that terrified her most. She actually believed that this powerful, dangerous man who could have anything or anyone he wanted would spend the rest of his life alone if she walked away. It wasn't fair, it wasn't reasonable, but it was true. "I'm scared," Clara admitted, "of staying, of leaving, of making the wrong choice and regretting it for the rest of my life." Adrian crossed to her, kneeling in front of the bench so they were eye to eye. "Fear is rational. You should be scared. This is a big decision, and there's no perfect answer. But Clara," he took her hands in his, garden dirt and all, "whatever you decide, whatever you choose, I need you to know something. Meeting you changed me. Loving you changed me. Even if you leave, even if I never see you again, I'll be grateful for this time we've had. For the way you made me want to be better than I am. For the way you saw me as human instead of just the things I've done. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. She'd spent 3 months seeing Adrian as either a monster or a mystery, never quite as a man. But here he was, kneeling in the dirt of his Italian garden, his heart in his hands, asking for nothing more than a chance. Not demanding, not coercing, just hoping. The car comes at midnight, Clara said softly. I know. And you'll really let me go? I will. I'll stand here and watch you leave, and I won't stop you, because you deserve to choose your own life. Clara looked into his gray eyes, searching for deception, for the angle, for the manipulation. But all she saw was love, complicated and imperfect, but real. The kind of love that was willing to let go because holding on too tight would destroy the very thing it treasured most. She had hours left to decide, hours to weigh freedom against possibility, safety against passion, the known against the terrifying unknown. Hours to figure out who Clara Bennett, or Clara Volkov, actually was, and what she actually wanted from this one wild and precious life. The afternoon sun beat down on the Italian garden, warming her skin, and Clara closed her eyes and tried to imagine both futures. In one, she was free but forever wondering what might have been. In the other, she was bound to a dangerous man in a dangerous world, but possibly, just possibly, building something extraordinary from the ruins of their impossible beginning. The clock kept ticking, and somewhere inside her, slowly, carefully, Clara Bennett began to make her choice. The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness, each minute feeling like an eternity, as Clara wandered through the villa, trying to sort through the chaos in her mind. Adrian had retreated to his office after their conversation in the garden, giving her the space she'd asked for, and the absence of his presence somehow made everything worse. At least when he was there, she could focus on him, on parsing his words, reading his expressions, trying to understand the complicated man she'd married. Alone, she had nothing to do but face her own fear and confusion. She found herself in the library, a sun-drenched room she'd barely explored before, floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the coast, while bookshelves lined the remaining walls. Most of the books were in Italian, but there was a shelf of English novels, classics mostly, the kind of literature professors assigned and students endured. Clara pulled out Pride and Prejudice, smiling despite herself at the irony. Elizabeth Bennet had rejected Darcy's first proposal because he was arrogant and had interfered in her sister's life. She'd only accepted him after he'd changed, after he'd proven himself worthy. But Adrian wasn't offering to change. He was offering himself exactly as he was, flawed and dangerous and honest about both. There would be no redemption arc, no transformation into something safer and more socially acceptable. Just the raw truth of who he was and the choice of whether she could live with that. Clara's phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from her father's nurse. He's asking about you. Should I tell him you'll call soon? She stepped out onto the library balcony, dialing before she could second-guess herself. Her father answered on the second ring, his voice weaker than it had been a month ago, but still carrying that warmth that had defined her entire childhood. Clara Bear, how's paradise? Beautiful. Overwhelming. Dad, Clara's voice caught. I need to ask you something. Anything, sweetheart. Do you hate me? For what I did? For marrying him? The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Clara almost thought the call had dropped. Then her father sighed, a sound that carried 20 years of love and worry and acceptance. Oh, honey, I could never hate you. Never. But I sold myself. I married a stranger for money. What kind of person does that make me? The kind who loves her father enough to sacrifice her own happiness to save him. The kind who's stronger than she knows. The kind who makes impossible choices in impossible situations and somehow still manages to keep her heart intact. Her father coughed, the wet rattle that had become familiar over the past months. You want to know what I think about your husband? I'm not sure I do, but tell me anyway. I think he's a criminal. I think he's dangerous. I think he operates in a world that would terrify most people. Her father paused. I also think he looks at you like you hung the moon and stars. I think he paid for my treatment without hesitation and never once made me feel like I owed him anything. I think he visited me 3 times in the hospital and talked to me about baseball and old movies, and he didn't have to do any of that. He could have just written the check and walked away. Clara gripped the balcony railing. That doesn't make what he does okay. No, it doesn't, but it makes him human, and humanity, real humanity, is always complicated, Clara. Your mother understood that. She used to say that people are like books with missing pages. You can read what's there and make your best guess about the rest, but you'll never know the whole story. I'm scared, Dad. If I stay, I'm choosing a life I never wanted. If I leave, I'm walking away from something that might be, I don't know, important somehow. Then let me ask you this. When you're with him, when it's just the two of you and he's not playing whatever role he plays for the rest of the world, do you feel safe? Clara thought about the previous night, lying in bed talking until dawn, about Adrian's hand in hers as they walked on the beach, about the way he'd knelt in the garden dirt and promised to let her go because that's what she deserved. Yes, which doesn't make any sense because he's literally one of the most dangerous people I've ever met. Safety isn't just about physical protection, honey. It's about being able to be yourself without fear of judgment. It's about being seen and valued for who you actually are. Your mother made me feel safe in that way, even though she was dying and I was terrified and nothing about our situation was actually safe. Her father's voice grew softer. If he makes you feel that way, if he sees you and values you and respects you, even with all his flaws, that might be worth more than you think. But what about morality? What about right and wrong? What about it? You think the pharmaceutical company charging $2 million for my treatment is moral? You think the insurance company that denied my claim 3 times is operating from some higher ethical ground? The world isn't divided into good people and bad people, Clara. It's full of people making choices, and those choices are usually a lot more complicated than they look from the outside. Clara wiped at her eyes, not surprised to find them wet. When did you get so wise? The day you were born, and I realized I was responsible for another human being. Makes you think about things differently. He coughed again. Listen to me, sweetheart. I don't have much time left. We both know that. And I don't want to spend what time I do have worrying about whether you're happy. So you need to make a choice. Not for me. Not for your husband. For yourself. What do you want, Clara? If you strip away all the fear and the guilt and the expectations, what does your heart actually want? That was the question, wasn't it? The one she'd been avoiding for 3 months, maybe longer. What did she want? Not what she should want, not what made logical sense, not what her old life would have demanded of her, just what she actually, truly wanted. I don't know yet, Clara admitted, but I think I'm getting closer to figuring it out. Then you still have time, and whatever you decide, know that I'm proud of you, for your strength, for your courage, for being exactly who you are, even when the world tries to tell you to be someone else. They talked for a few more minutes about nothing important. The hospital food, the nurses, the terrible daytime television he'd been subjected to before Clara promised to call again soon and ended the call. She stood on the balcony for a long time after, watching the sun move across the sky, thinking about choices and consequences and the messy reality of being human. When she finally went back inside, she found Adrian in the kitchen, of all places, making coffee with the kind of focused attention he brought to everything he did. He looked up when she entered, his expression carefully neutral. "Your father?" he asked, clearly having noticed the phone call. "He told me I should do whatever makes me happy." "Smart man." Adrian poured 2 cups, sliding one across the counter to her. "Did you tell him about tonight?" "No, I didn't want to worry him." Clara wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "He likes you, you know, which makes all of this more complicated. Because it would be easier if he hated me." Exactly. Then I could feel righteous about leaving. Instead, I feel like I'm disappointing everyone no matter what I choose. Adrian moved around the counter, stopping a careful distance away. "You're not disappointing me. Whatever you decide, Clara, I meant what I said. I'll be grateful for this time we've had, even if it's all we ever get." "Stop being so understanding. It's making this harder. Would you prefer I be an ass? I could probably manage that if it would help." Despite everything, Clara felt a smile tug at her lips. "How are you joking right now? Your wife is deciding whether to leave you in," she checked her watch, "7 hours, and you're making jokes." "What else can I do? Fall apart? Beg? Lock you in a room and hope Stockholm Syndrome kicks in? Adrian's expression was wry. I've done everything I can, Clara. I've been honest. I've given you space. I've laid my entire life bare for your judgment. Now it's up to you, and nothing I say or do in the next 7 hours is going to change the fundamental choice you have to make. Doesn't it terrify you, being that powerless? More than I can express, but it's also strangely liberating. For once in my life, I can't control the outcome. I can't manipulate or strategize or force things to go my way. I can only wait and hope and trust that whatever happens is what's supposed to happen. Clara studied him over the rim of her coffee cup. This man who'd built an empire on control, finally surrendering to something he couldn't dominate. Tell me about the first time you killed someone. The question landed between them like a stone, heavy and unavoidable. Adrian didn't flinch, didn't try to change the subject. He just set down his cup and met her eyes with the same unflinching honesty he'd shown since they'd started this impossible conversation. I was 22, working for a man named Sergei Volkov, no relation, though I took his name later as a tribute. Someone had stolen from him, someone I was supposed to be watching. Sergei gave me a choice: kill the thief or die myself for my failure to prevent the theft. Adrian's voice remained steady, factual. I chose to live. I followed the man who'd stolen from us to his apartment. He was young, maybe my age, scared. He begged. He cried. He offered to pay it back. And I shot him anyway because that was the price of my own survival. Do you remember his name? Viktor Petrov. I remember all their names, Clara. Every single one. That's the cost of doing what I do. You don't get to forget. You don't get to pretend it didn't happen or that they weren't real people with families and futures. You carry them with you. Clara set down her coffee, her hands trembling slightly. How many? Directly? 12. Indirectly, by ordering it done? 47. That I know of. There may be more that happened without my explicit knowledge, consequences of decisions I made that rippled out in ways I didn't anticipate. 59 people. 59 people who are dead because of choices I made, yes? Adrian didn't look away, didn't minimize it. I won't pretend they all deserved it. Some were in the business, people who knew the risks. Some were collateral damage. Some were probably just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I carry every single one of them. How do you live with that? Honestly, some days better than others. I tell myself that I have also saved lives. Through the medical funding, through protecting people who work for me, through maintaining enough order in my territory that small-time violence doesn't flourish the way it does in more chaotic organizations. I tell myself that in my world, if I didn't do these things, someone worse would. But those are justifications, Clara. Rationalizations. The truth is simpler and harder. I made choices that resulted in deaths, and I have to live with that reality every day. Clara walked to the window, staring out at the perfect Italian afternoon. Why are you telling me this? You could have lied. Made it sound better. I would never have known. Because you deserve the truth. Because if you stay, you need to know exactly who you're staying with. And because Adrian moved to stand beside her, close but not touching. I want you to choose me with your eyes open. Not because I manipulated you or hid the worst parts of myself, but because you looked at all of it and decided I was still worth choosing. That's a lot to put on someone. I know. And if it's too much, if you can't live with what I've done, I'll understand. But I won't lie to you, Clara. Not about this. Not about anything. They stood together in the fading afternoon light, and Clara felt the weight of every choice she'd ever made pressing down on her shoulders. She'd spent her whole life trying to be good, trying to make the right choices, trying to live up to some invisible standard of morality that she'd never quite defined. And where had it gotten her? Working 3 jobs, watching her father die, desperate enough to marry a stranger for money. Maybe goodness wasn't about following rules. Maybe it was about something messier and more human, about making hard choices in impossible situations and trying to do the least harm possible. Maybe Adrian, with all his blood and money and complicated morality, was trying to do exactly that in the only way he knew how. Or maybe she was just trying to justify the decision her heart had already made. I need to see it, Clara said suddenly. See what? Your world. Not a sanitized version. Not carefully controlled glimpses. I need to see what my life would actually be like if I stay. The real thing. Adrian turned to face her fully, something like alarm crossing his features. Clara, you said you'd be honest. You said you'd show me the truth, so show me, tonight, before I have to decide. She met his eyes, unflinching. Take me into your world, Adrian, the real one, and let me see if I can survive it. For a long moment, Adrian just looked at her, clearly weighing risks and possibilities. Then he pulled out his phone, making a quick call in rapid Italian. When he hung up, his expression was grim. There's a meeting tonight, in Rome, a negotiation with a rival organization over territorial disputes. It's going to be tense, possibly violent, definitely dangerous. If I bring you, then I'll see what my life actually looks like. Not hypothetically, not theoretically, actually. You could get hurt. You have dozens of armed guards. I think I'll survive. I'm not talking about physical harm. I'm talking about what it does to you, seeing this world up close. There's no unseeing it, Clara. Once you witness certain things, they stay with you forever. I know. But I'd rather know the truth and make an informed choice than spend the rest of my life wondering what I ran away from. Adrian studied her face, looking for something. Doubt, fear, uncertainty. Whatever he saw, it must have satisfied him because he nodded slowly. Okay, but you do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you. You stay close to Marcus and the security team. You don't speak unless I specifically ask you to. And if things go wrong, if violence breaks out, you let them protect you. Can you do that? Yes. Then get changed. Something elegant but not flashy. We leave in an hour. Clara went to the bedroom, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and something that felt disturbingly like excitement. She chose a simple black dress, elegant enough for whatever setting they'd be walking into, but understated enough not to draw attention. She pulled her hair back in a sleek bun, applied minimal makeup, and stared at her reflection, wondering who this woman was. Not the Clara who'd worked in diners and struggled to pay bills, not quite the Clara who'd married a crime lord for money. Someone in between. Someone still being formed by the choices she was making. When she emerged, she found Adrian waiting in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her first car, looking every inch the powerful businessman he pretended to be. But there was tension in his shoulders, a hardness in his eyes that suggested the man beneath the civilized veneer was preparing for war. Last chance to change your mind, he said. I'm not changing my mind. Then let's go. The drive to Rome was tense and silent. Marcus sat in the front passenger seat, speaking occasionally into his radio in clipped Italian. 2 cars full of security flanked them, a rolling fortress moving through the Italian countryside as the sun sank toward the horizon. Clara watched the landscape blur past, trying to calm her racing heart, wondering if she was making the biggest mistake of her life or the bravest choice she'd ever made. They arrived at a restaurant in Rome's historic center, an elegant establishment that was clearly closed to regular customers for the evening. Adrian helped Clara from the car, his hand on her lower back, and leaned in to whisper in her ear. Stay calm. Don't react to anything you see or hear. These men will be looking for weakness, for any sign they can exploit. You're my wife, which means you're both an asset and a potential liability. Show them strength, Clara. Show them you belong here. Clara nodded, straightening her spine, lifting her chin. She'd survived poverty and loss, and 3 months married to a man who terrified her. She could survive one night in his world. The restaurant's interior was all dark wood and candlelight, intimate and expensive. A long table had been set up in the private dining room, already occupied by 6 men and 2 women, all dressed in the same elegant but understated style that seemed to be the uniform of successful criminals. They looked up as Adrian entered, expressions ranging from neutral to overtly hostile. Volkov. The man at the head of the table stood, extending his hand. He was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and the kind of face that suggested he'd seen everything and been impressed by none of it. You're late. I apologize, Don Castellano. Traffic from the coast. Adrian shook his hand firmly, then gestured to Clara. My wife, Clara. Clara. This is Don Marco Castellano, who controls most of central Italy. Castellano's eyes swept over Clara with the calculating assessment of a man evaluating a potential asset. I heard you'd married. An American, yes? How unexpected. Refreshing, actually, Adrian said smoothly, pulling out a chair for Clara before taking his own seat. Shall we begin? What followed was 2 hours of the most civilized violence Clara had ever witnessed. The discussion was ostensibly about territory, specifically a contested area in Naples where both organizations operated. But beneath the polite language and formal negotiations, she could feel the threat of real violence humming like an electrical current through the room. Castellano wanted Adrian to cede control of the port operations. Adrian refused. Castellano suggested that continued resistance would be bad for business. Adrian suggested that attempts to force the issue would be worse. Back and forth they went, while the other people at the table watched like spectators at a tennis match, waiting to see who would blink first. "You're being unreasonable," Castellano said, his polite tone not quite masking the anger beneath. "The port has always been our territory. Your expansion there is a violation of our long-standing agreement. Our agreement was made 15 years ago, when the port handled a tenth of its current volume. Circumstances changed, Don Castellano. Agreements must evolve with them." Adrian's voice remained calm, but Clara could see the tension in his jaw. "I'm willing to discuss profit sharing. I'm willing to coordinate our operations to avoid conflict, but I'm not surrendering control of infrastructure I built and paid for. Infrastructure you built on our territory. Infrastructure you had no interest in building yourself until I demonstrated its value." One of Castellano's men, a younger guy with a scar across his cheek, leaned forward. "You talk about value. Let's talk about the value of peace, of continued cooperation, of not having this conversation turn into something much less pleasant." Marcus, standing behind Adrian's chair, shifted almost imperceptibly. Clara felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees. "Was that a threat?" Adrian asked mildly. "An observation," Scarface said, "about the consequences of intransigence." "I see." Adrian picked up his wine glass, studying the deep red liquid. "Then let me offer my own observation. This room contains 10 of your people and 6 of mine. You might think that gives you an advantage, but 3 of your people are accountants who've never held a gun. 2 are administrators who handle your legitimate businesses. You actually have 5 people here who matter in a fight, while all 6 of mine are former military with extensive combat experience." He took a sip of wine. "So, if this conversation does turn into something less pleasant, Don Castellano, I encourage you to think very carefully about whether you like those odds." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara kept her expression neutral, her hands folded in her lap, even as her heart threatened to pound out of her chest. This was it. The moment where everything could explode into violence, where the civilized veneer would crack and reveal the brutal reality underneath. Castellano stared at Adrian for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, he smiled. "You have balls, Volkov. I'll give you that." He raised his own wine glass. "To evolved agreements, then. We split the port operation 60-40, with you keeping operational control in exchange for the larger share of profits coming to us. And you provide quarterly financial reports proving that the split is being honored." Adrian didn't hesitate. "Agreed, with the understanding that any attempt to undercut my operations or interfere with my supply chains voids the agreement and returns us to the current contested status." "Fair enough?" Castellano stood, extending his hand again. "It's been a pleasure doing business with you." "Likewise." Just like that, the tension evaporated. Drinks were poured, food was served, and the conversation shifted to neutral topics: politics, business, the challenges of operating in an increasingly digital world. Clara sat beside Adrian, barely touching her food, watching this strange theater of civilized criminals conducting business with the formality of corporate executives. She caught Adrian's eye once, and he gave her a barely perceptible nod. She'd done well, his expression said. She'd witnessed his world and hadn't broken. The evening wound down around 10. Castellano walked them to the door personally, clearly satisfied with the night's outcome. "Your wife," he said to Adrian, but looking at Clara. "She's very quiet." "She's observant," Adrian corrected. "There's a difference." "Indeed." Castellano turned to Clara directly. "Welcome to our world, Mrs. Volkov. I hope you survive it with your soul intact." In the car heading back to the coast, Clara finally let out the breath she felt like she'd been holding for hours. Adrian sat beside her, still tense, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "You did well," he said quietly. "I barely did anything." "Exactly. You stayed calm, you didn't draw attention, you didn't give them anything to use against me. That's everything in situations like that. He squeezed her hand. How do you feel? Clara considered the question honestly. Terrified, exhilarated, confused, like I just watched a play where everyone was acting but the consequences were real. That's exactly what it was. We're all performing, Clara. Playing roles, maintaining images, negotiating through theater instead of outright violence. That's what separates organizations like mine from street gangs. We've learned that performance is more profitable than blood. But the threat of blood is always there. Always. It has to be, or the performance doesn't work. If Castellano thought I wouldn't actually fight to protect my territory, he would have just taken it. Adrian looked at her in the dim light from passing street lamps. This is what your life would be, Clara. Not every night, but often enough. Dinners where violence simmers beneath polite conversation. Meetings where one wrong word could start a war. Living in a world where everything is a negotiation and everyone is playing an angle. And you don't get tired of it? Of constantly performing, constantly calculating? Every single day. But it's the life I built, and it's the only one I know how to live. He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. The question is whether it's a life you can live too. Clara stared out the window as they drove through the Roman night, heading back toward the coast and the villa and the choice that was coming up on her like a train she couldn't stop. She had 90 minutes left, 90 minutes to decide if she could be Clara Volkov, wife of a crime lord, living in this world of beautiful violence and civilized threats, or if she would be Clara Bennett again, free but forever marked by these months, forever wondering about the path not taken. They arrived at the villa just before midnight. The car that was supposed to take her away sat in the driveway, engine running, a dark sedan with tinted windows that promised anonymity and escape. Adrian had kept his word. Despite everything, despite the possessiveness and the control and the clear pain the thought of losing her caused him, he'd actually arranged her escape route and let her see it waiting. Clara stood in the driveway, staring at the car, her overnight bag feeling heavy in her hand. Inside it was everything she needed to disappear. The fake passport, the cash, the burner phone. Her ticket to freedom. Her chance to reclaim the simple life she'd lost when she'd agreed to this devil's bargain. Adrian stood beside her, hands in his pockets, his expression carefully blank. "The choice is yours," he said quietly. "Get in that car and it all ends. Stay and it begins for real. Either way, Clara, I need you to know, loving you changed me. Meeting you made me want to be better than I am, and I'll carry that with me, no matter what you decide." Clara looked at the car, then at the villa, then at Adrian, this complicated, dangerous, impossibly tender man who'd given her the one thing she'd never expected, a genuine choice. Her hand tightened on the overnight bag, and slowly Clara Bennett began to walk. Clara walked past the idling car without stopping, her footsteps steady on the gravel driveway as she headed toward the villa's entrance. Behind her, she heard Adrian's sharp intake of breath, the barely audible sound of a man who'd been holding himself together by sheer force of will, finally allowing himself to hope. She didn't turn around. Not yet. She needed to do this on her own terms, needed to walk into the villa and set down her bag and then, only then, face the enormity of what she'd just chosen. Inside, Clara climbed the stairs to their bedroom, her legs shaking with adrenaline and something that felt dangerously close to certainty. She could hear Adrian behind her, maintaining a careful distance, not crowding her, giving her space even now when everything had changed. The overnight bag felt lighter as she set it on the bed, staring at it like it was a bomb that had somehow failed to detonate. "Clara!" Adrian's voice came from the doorway, rough with emotion barely contained. "What just happened?" She turned to face him, this man she'd married in desperation and was now choosing to stay with for reasons that had nothing to do with money or obligation. He looked wrecked, his perfect composure shattered, his gray eyes bright with something that might have been tears if Adrian Volkov was the kind of man who cried. "I made a choice," Clara said simply. "The one you gave me, the one I needed to make for myself." "You walked past the car." "I did." "Why?" The question came out broken, like Adrian couldn't quite believe what he'd witnessed. "Clara, I need to understand. After everything you've seen, after everything I told you, why would you stay?" Clara moved to the balcony doors, pushing them open to let in the night air. the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below. She'd stood on this balcony so many times over the past few days, staring out at the sea and feeling trapped. Now, strangely, it felt different. Not like freedom, exactly, but not like a cage either. Because I'm tired of being safe, she said finally. I've spent my whole life making the smart choice, the responsible choice, the choice that kept me small and scared and barely surviving. And where did it get me? Working 3 jobs I hated, watching my father die, so desperate I was willing to marry a stranger just to save him. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. You're just not listening. Clara turned to face him, crossing her arms. You asked me what I want. Not what I should want. Not what makes sense, but what I actually want. And the truth is, she took a breath, steadying herself. I want this. The complications. The moral ambiguity. The terrifying possibility that I might actually be falling in love with you despite every good reason not to. Adrian moved into the room slowly, like approaching a wild animal that might bolt. You're falling in love with me? I don't know. Maybe. Probably. It's hard to tell the difference between love and Stockholm Syndrome when you're living it. Clara laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. What I do know is that when I looked at that car, all I could think about was what I'd be running back to. My old apartment, my old life, my old self, who was so small and scared and convinced that the best she could hope for was survival. And I realized I don't want to be her anymore. So you're staying because you don't want to go back? No, I'm staying because when I'm with you, I feel more alive than I've ever felt. Because you see me, really see me. Not as some damsel to rescue or some trophy to display, but as a person who's strong and complicated and capable of making hard choices. Because you gave me the one thing I never expected, the power to choose, even when it hurt you to do it. Adrian closed the distance between them, stopping just close enough that Clara could feel the heat radiating off him. And tonight, watching me negotiate with Castellano, seeing how my world actually works, that didn't change your mind? It terrified me. But it also showed me who you really are. Not the monster I wanted you to be, and not the prince from a fairy tale either. Just a man trying to survive in the world he built, trying to do it with some shred of honor, even when honor seems impossible. Clara reached up, touching his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. You could have lied to me about all of it, about the killing, about the violence, about what my life would actually look like. But you didn't. You showed me everything, even the parts that damned you, because you wanted me to choose you with my eyes open. I needed you to know what you were choosing. I do know. And I'm choosing it anyway. Choosing you, Adrian, not because I don't have other options, but because this, whatever this is between us, it's worth the risk. Something broke in Adrian's carefully maintained composure. He pulled Clara against him with a desperation that suggested he'd been holding back since the moment she'd walked past that car, his arms wrapping around her like he was afraid she might still disappear. Clara felt his heart pounding against her chest, felt the tremor in his hands, felt the weight of his relief and fear and hope all tangled together. I don't deserve this, Adrian said into her hair. I don't deserve you. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway. Clara pulled back enough to look at him. I need you to understand something, though. I'm not doing this blind. I know what you are, I know what you do, and I'm not going to pretend it doesn't bother me because it does. Some days it's going to bother me a lot. I know. And I'm going to push back. I'm going to question your decisions. I'm going to make you justify the things you do, and I'm not going to accept that's just how my world works as a good enough answer. If I'm going to be part of this life, then I get a say in how we live it. For the first time since she'd walked past the car, Adrian smiled, a real smile, unguarded and genuine. I would expect nothing less. Good. Because I'm done being powerless, Adrian. I'm done letting other people make all my choices for me. If we're doing this, if we're really trying to build something together, then it's a partnership. Not you controlling me for my own protection. Not you making all the decisions and expecting me to fall in line. A real partnership where we both get a voice. Agreed. Adrian cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones. What else? I want to see my father, regularly, and I want him brought here if his health allows it. I want him to see that I'm okay, that I chose this, that I'm not some prisoner in a gilded cage. Done. I'll make arrangements tomorrow. And I want something to do. I'm not going to be one of those wives who just shops and gets spa treatments and waits around for her husband to come home. I need purpose, Adrian. I need to feel useful. What did you want to do? Before, he gestured vaguely, all of this. Clara thought about the college degree she'd never finished, the dreams she'd put aside when survival became her only priority. I wanted to be a social worker. I wanted to help people who were struggling, who needed someone in their corner. People like me who fell through the cracks because they didn't have money or connections or anyone who gave a damn. Then do it. I can't exactly get a social work license when I'm married to a crime lord. No, but you can run a foundation. You saw the documents in my office, the medical funding, the scholarships, the grants. Right now it's just money moving through shell corporations. It could be so much more if someone actually cared about making a difference was running it. Adrian's expression shifted to something thoughtful. You could build something real, Clara. Something that helps people. Use my money for good, since so much of it comes from questionable sources anyway. The possibility opened up in Clara's mind like a flower blooming. She could help people, not in some abstract write a check and forget about it way, but actually make a difference in individual lives. She could be the person she'd needed when she was desperate and scared and watching her father die. I'd want complete control, Clara said, over who gets funding, how much, what the criteria are. No interference from you or your business interests. It's yours. I'll have the lawyers draw up papers making you the sole administrator. Adrian kissed her forehead, then her cheeks, then finally her lips, soft and sweet and full of promise. Anything else? Yeah, one more thing. Clara took a breath, steadying herself. I need you to promise me that if I ever ask you to stop something, if I tell you that a particular action or decision crosses a line I can't live with, you'll at least consider it. You don't have to always agree, but you have to be willing to hear me, really hear me, and think about whether there's another way. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with what she was asking. Finally, he nodded. I can promise to listen, to genuinely consider what you're saying and look for alternatives when they exist. But Clara, there are going to be times when there isn't another way. Times when the choice is between bad options and worse ones. I need you to understand that. I do. I'm not asking you to be someone you're not. I'm just asking you to let me be your conscience sometimes. To give me a voice in decisions that affect both of us. Deal. Adrian pulled her close again, and this time when he kissed her, it was different. Not desperate or relieved, but claiming. He was kissing his wife, the woman who'd chosen him with full knowledge of who and what he was, and Clara kissed him back with equal fervor, claiming him right back. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. I need to tell the driver he can leave. Yeah, you should probably do that. And I should cancel the fake passport, the new identity, all of it. That too. But first, Adrian's hand slid down to her waist, pulling her flush against him. I need to make love to my wife who chose me, who stayed. Clara felt heat flood through her, desire mixing with something deeper and more complicated. Your wife who's going to make your life very difficult. I'm counting on it. He kissed her again, and this time there was no holding back, no careful distance, no pretense that this was anything other than what it was. Two people who'd found each other in the most improbable circumstances and decided to build something real from the impossible foundation they'd been given. Adrian lifted Clara easily, carrying her to the bed, and for the first time since their wedding night, she didn't feel like she was surrendering. She felt like she was choosing, actively, consciously choosing this man, this life, this complicated future they'd build together. When Adrian paused, looking down at her with something like wonder in his eyes, Clara reached up and pulled him down to her. I'm here, she said simply. I'm staying. So stop looking at me like I might evaporate and just be here with me. I'm here, Adrian echoed, his voice rough. I'm not going anywhere. They made love slowly, thoroughly, with none of the careful politeness that had characterized their previous encounters. This was different, honest and raw and real. Clara let herself feel everything, the fear and the desire, the uncertainty and the hope, the the terrifying possibility that this might actually work. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, Claire's head on Adrian's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow to normal. Through the open balcony doors, she could hear the waves and smell the salt air, and for the first time in months, she felt something that might have been peace. "What happens now?" Claire asked quietly. "Now we figure it out as we go. Build something together. Make mistakes and fix them. Try to be better than we were yesterday." Adrian's fingers traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "There's no rule book for this, Clara. No guide for how to make a marriage work when it started the way ours did." "Then we write our own rules." "Exactly." Clara was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm still scared, of your world, of the violence, of becoming someone I don't recognize." "Good. Fear keeps you sharp, keeps you asking questions. The day you stop being scared is the day you stop seeing clearly." Adrian tilted her chin up so she was looking at him. "But I need you to trust that I'll protect you. Not by locking you away or controlling you, but by making sure you have everything you need to survive in this world. Information, resources, training, if you want it." "Training? If you're going to be part of my life, you should know how to protect yourself. How to read a dangerous situation, how to handle a weapon if necessary, how to stay calm under pressure. I'm not saying you'll ever need those skills, but having them might make you feel less powerless." Clara considered this. The idea of learning to shoot a gun, to defend herself, to be something other than a victim waiting to happen, it appealed to her more than she wanted to admit. "Okay, yeah, I want that. Tomorrow then. We'll start tomorrow. But tonight..." Adrian pulled her closer, his lips finding the sensitive spot below her ear. "Tonight, we just exist. No planning, no strategizing. Just us." "Just us," Clara agreed, surrendering to the warmth of his embrace and the strange new reality she'd chosen. She woke sometime later to find Adrian gone, the sheets beside her cool. Panic flared briefly before she heard his voice from the balcony, speaking quietly on the phone in Italian. Clara wrapped herself in a robe and padded out to join him, finding him leaning against the railing, the pre-dawn sky beginning to lighten behind him. He glanced at her, holding up one finger, then concluded his call and pocketed his phone. "Problem?" Clara asked. "Castellano's people tried to move on one of my warehouses in Naples. Apparently they decided the agreement we reached last night wasn't quite favorable enough." Adrian's expression was grim. "They're testing me, seeing if marriage has made me soft." "And has it?" "No, but it's made me more careful." He turned to face her fully. "In the old days, I would have responded immediately with overwhelming force. Burned down one of their warehouses, maybe killed whoever ordered the move. Quick, brutal, unambiguous. But now? Now I'm thinking about the fact that my wife is standing on this balcony in a villa that could become a target if I escalate things too quickly. Now I'm considering whether there are ways to make my point without starting a war that could put you in danger." Adrian smiled slightly. "See? You're making me soft already." "I don't want to make you soft. I want to make you think." "You're doing that too. Marcus is handling it. A proportional response that makes clear the agreement stands but doesn't burn any bridges. We take back what they tried to take, but we don't escalate." Clara moved to stand beside him, looking out at the lightening sky. "Is it always going to be like this? Threats and responses, constant testing?" "Probably. My world doesn't have retirement plans or peaceful endings. You stay in until you die, or until someone stronger pushes you out." Adrian slipped an arm around her waist. "But I'm building towards something different, legitimizing more of the business, setting up structures that can outlast me. It'll take years, maybe decades, but eventually, I want to leave this life behind." "And do what?" "I don't know yet. Something quieter. Maybe we buy a vineyard, make wine, pretend we were always respectable." He glanced at her. "Think you could handle being a wine baron's wife?" "Only if I get to stomp the grapes myself." Adrian laughed, the sound genuine and surprised. "Deal. Though I should warn you, Marcus has already informed me that he's too old to learn about viticulture, so we'd have to find new security." "Marcus would follow you anywhere, and you know it." "True. He's been with me since I was 25 and stupid enough to think loyalty was bought instead of earned. Turned out I was wrong, and he's been proving it ever since." They stood together watching the sun rise over the Mediterranean, and Clara felt the weight of her choice settling more firmly into place. This was her life now. This beautiful, dangerous, complicated life with a man who would probably drive her crazy and definitely terrify her and hopefully, possibly, love her in ways she was only beginning to understand. "I should call my father," Clara said as full daylight broke across the sky. "Let him know I'm staying. He'll want to know I'm okay." "Use the secure line in my office. I'll make breakfast." Adrian kissed her temple. "And Clara, thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me. The real me. And choosing to stay anyway?" He headed back inside, leaving her alone with the sunrise and the sea and the enormous reality of what she'd done. Clara took a moment to just breathe, to let herself feel the magnitude of this choice. Then she went inside to call her father and tell him that his daughter had made a decision that would probably horrify him and definitely worried her, but felt more right than anything she'd done in years. Her father picked up on the first ring. "Clara, is everything okay?" "It's early." "I'm fine, Dad. Better than fine, actually. I needed to tell you something." "You sound different. What happened?" Clara took a breath. "I had a chance to leave, to walk away from all of this, from Adrian, from the life I've fallen into. He gave me that choice, completely freely, and I didn't take it." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Clara wondered if the connection had dropped. Then her father's voice came through, quiet and thoughtful. "You chose to stay." "I did." "Why?" It was the same question Adrian had asked, the same question she'd been asking herself. But somehow, hearing it from her father, the man who'd raised her to be strong and independent and never settle for less than she deserved, it hit differently. "Because I finally figured out what I want, Dad. Not what I should want, not what's safest or smartest, but what actually makes me feel alive. And it's this. It's him. It's building something real out of something that started as a transaction." Clara walked to the office window, looking out at the villa grounds. "I know it doesn't make sense. I know you probably think I've lost my mind. Actually, I think you found yourself." Her father's voice held a warmth that made Clara's eyes sting with tears. "You've spent your whole life trying to be what other people needed. A perfect daughter, a responsible adult, someone who always made the safe choice. But you were never really happy, were you?" "No," Clara admitted. "I was surviving, which felt like enough until I realized there might be other options. Your mother once told me that the best decisions she ever made were the ones that scared her. Marrying me, having you, leaving her family's expectations behind to build a life on our terms. She said that fear was a compass pointing toward growth." Her father paused. "Sounds like you found your compass, sweetheart. You're not disappointed?" "In my daughter who made an impossible choice in an impossible situation, and then had the courage to choose again when given the chance? How could I possibly be disappointed? Clara, I'm proud of you, for knowing your own heart, for being brave enough to follow it, even when it leads somewhere scary." The tears Clara had been holding back finally spilled over. "I love you, Dad." "Well, I love you too, Clara Bear. Now go build yourself an extraordinary life, and tell that husband of yours that if he doesn't treat you right, terminal cancer won't save him from me." Clara laughed through her tears. "I'll tell him." When she hung up, she found Adrian standing in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee, his expression carefully neutral. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yeah. My father says if you don't treat me right, he's going to kick your ass." "I would expect nothing less." Adrian handed her a cup. "He knows you chose to stay. He knows. And he's proud of me for it, which might be the most unexpected response I could have imagined." Clara took a sip of coffee, perfectly prepared the way she liked it. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Make coffee exactly how I like it. Remember how I take my wine. Know when I need space and when I need someone to push back. It's like you've been studying me." "I have been. For months. Because you matter to me, Clara. Because understanding you, really understanding you, is how I show love." Adrian set down his cup, moving closer. "I know you're not comfortable with grand gestures or expensive gifts. I know you value actions over words, so I pay attention. I learn what makes you comfortable, what scares you, what brings you joy. And then I try to give you more of the good and less of the bad." That's... Clara didn't quite have words for what it was. Overwhelming, sweet, slightly terrifying in its intensity. "You know that's not normal, right?" "Nothing about us is normal. Why start now? Fair point. Clara drank her coffee, trying to organize the chaos of thoughts spinning through her head. She'd made her choice, but now she had to live with it. Had to figure out what being Clara Volkov actually meant, beyond the surface level of expensive dresses and security details. I want to get started on the foundation, she said abruptly. Today, I want to see the full scope of what you're already funding, understand the systems in place, start figuring out how to make it better. Done. I'll have Dimitri bring all the relevant files. Adrian pulled out his phone, already typing. What else? I want to meet more of your people, not just the security team, but the administrators, the accountants, the people who keep your empire running day to day. If I'm going to be part of this world, I need to understand it fully. Also done. We can start tomorrow if you want. Give you today to settle in, process everything. No, today. I don't want to overthink this, Adrian. I'll talk myself out of it if I have too much time to dwell. Clara set down her coffee, facing him squarely. I chose this. Now I need to commit to it fully. No half measures. No looking back. Something fierce and proud flashed in Adrian's eyes. You're going to be magnificent. I'm going to be terrified and probably make a lot of mistakes. Those aren't mutually exclusive. He pulled her close, kissing her soundly. Come on, let's start your education. The rest of the day passed in a blur of information. Dimitri arrived with boxes of files, financial records, grant applications, and correspondence. Clara spread it all out across the villa's dining table, diving in with the kind of focused intensity she hadn't felt since her college days. Adrian worked beside her, explaining the structures, the shell corporations, the careful laundering that made dirty money clean enough to help people without raising red flags with law enforcement. It was dizzying and overwhelming and occasionally horrifying, the sheer amount of money moving through these systems, the lives changed by it, the fact that most of it came from activities that destroyed other lives entirely. But Clara forced herself to look at all of it, to understand the full scope of what she was taking on. By evening, she had pages of notes and a headache that threatened to split her skull. But she also had the beginnings of a plan, ways to expand the medical funding, criteria for educational grants, outreach programs for domestic violence survivors. Ways to take Adrian's blood money and turn it into something that might actually redeem a small portion of the harm it had caused. This is good, Dimitri said, reading through her initial proposals. Very good. You have a mind for this, Mrs. Volkov. I have a mind for helping people. The bureaucracy I'll have to learn as I go. You'll have help. I can assign you staff, people who understand the administrative side. Dimitri glanced at Adrian. With your permission, of course. Whatever Clara needs, Adrian said immediately. This is her project. I'm just the money behind it. Clara felt something settle in her chest. Not quite peace, but something close to it. Purpose. Direction. The sense that maybe, just maybe, she could take this impossible situation and turn it into something meaningful. She couldn't change what Adrian did to earn his money, but she could make damn sure some of it went to people who desperately needed it. People like her father, people like she used to be. That night, exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure, Clara stood on the balcony one more time. The car was gone from the driveway, her fake passport destroyed, her old life officially closed. There was no going back now, even if she wanted to. Adrian joined her, slipping his arms around her waist from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. No regrets? He asked quietly. Clara thought about it honestly. Ask me again in a year? Fair enough. He tightened his hold slightly. Thank you for staying, for trying, for giving us a chance to build something real. Thank you for letting me choose, for being honest even when it damned you, for seeing me as strong enough to handle the truth. Clara turned in his arms, looking up at him. We're going to mess this up sometimes, you know. We're going to fight and disagree and drive each other crazy. I'm counting on it. Perfect would be boring. Then I promise to be as imperfect and difficult as possible. That's all I ask. They kissed as the stars came out over the Mediterranean, two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely way imaginable and decided to see where this impossible path might lead. Clara didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if they'd make it work or if the violence of Adrian's world would eventually tear them apart. She didn't know if she could really build a life in the shadows, married to a man who straddled the line between civilization and chaos. But she knew she was going to try. And for now, that was enough. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of activity that left Clara simultaneously exhausted and more energized than she'd felt in years. True to his word, Adrian had given her complete control over the foundation, and she'd thrown herself into the work with an intensity that surprised even her. Mornings began early with coffee on the terrace, Clara reviewing grant applications while Adrian handled his business calls in careful Italian and Russian. They'd developed a rhythm, working in parallel, occasionally reaching for each other's hand, existing in comfortable silence broken only by the sound of waves and the rustle of paper. It felt domestic in a way Clara had never expected, this criminal and his accidental wife playing at normal life between the cracks of his dangerous world. Today, though, was different. Today her father was arriving. Clara had been pacing the villa's entrance hall for the past 20 minutes, checking her watch every few seconds, adjusting her dress, trying to calm the nervous energy thrumming through her veins. Adrian watched from the doorway of his office, amusement and affection warring on his face. "He's going to love the villa," Adrian said for the third time. "You don't know that. He's never cared about luxury. He might hate it. He might think it's ostentatious and ridiculous and evidence that I've completely lost my mind." Clara smoothed her hands over her dress again, a nervous gesture she couldn't seem to stop. "What if he takes one look at all this and decides I've made a terrible mistake? Then we'll deal with it together." Adrian crossed to her, stilling her restless hands with his own. "Clara, breathe. Your father loves you. He told you he was proud of your choice. Nothing about seeing where you live is going to change that. You don't understand. He's going to see the guards, the security, the obvious wealth, and he's going to worry. He's going to think I'm trapped here, that I'm putting on a brave face but secretly miserable." "Are you? Miserable?" Clara stopped, considering the question honestly. 3 weeks ago, she would have said yes without hesitation. But now, after diving into the foundation work, after spending her days making real differences in people's lives, after nights with Adrian where they talked about everything and nothing, after slowly building something that felt remarkably like partnership, was she miserable? "No," she admitted. "I'm not," which is almost more terrifying than if I was. "Why?" "Because it means I was right about us, about this choice. And being right means I have to fully commit to it. No safety net, no backup plan. Just," she gestured helplessly, "this life we're building." Adrian pulled her close, his chin resting on top of her head. "You know what I think scares you more than being wrong? Being happy. Actually allowing yourself to want this, to enjoy it, without guilt or shame or constant second-guessing." He wasn't entirely wrong. Clara had spent so long in survival mode that she'd forgotten how to recognize happiness when it showed up. She'd been waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the violence of Adrian's world to come crashing through their carefully constructed peace. Instead, the past 3 weeks had been remarkably quiet. Adrian handling his business with the cold efficiency that kept wars from starting, Clara building her foundation, both of them learning how to exist together in ways that felt sustainable. The sound of a car in the driveway sent Clara's heart racing. She pulled away from Adrian, moving to the window just in time to see Marcus helping an older man out of the back seat. Her father looked thinner than when she'd last seen him, more fragile, but his eyes were bright and alert as he took in the villa's impressive exterior. "He's here," Clara breathed. "Then let's go greet him, together." They walked out into the sunshine, hand in hand, and Clara felt her anxiety spike even higher when her father's gaze landed on their joined hands. But his expression softened rather than hardening, and when he opened his arms, Clara rushed into them without thinking. "Dad, you're really here." "I'm really here, Clara Bear." Her father held her tight, and she could feel how much weight he'd lost, how his once strong frame had been whittled down by illness and treatment. But his grip was still firm, still solid. "Let me look at you." Clara stepped back, letting him study her face. She knew what he was looking for, signs of distress, of coercion, of unhappiness masked by expensive clothes and perfect makeup. Let him look. She had nothing to hide. "You look good," her father said finally, something like wonder in his voice. "Better than good. You look happy." "I am, I think, most of the time." Clara glanced at Adrian, who'd maintained a respectful distance but stayed close enough to offer silent support. "Dad, you remember Adrian. Mr. Bennett." Adrian extended his hand. Thank you for making the trip. I know the journey is difficult. Mr. Volkov. Her father's handshake was assessing, the grip of a man trying to measure another man's character through physical contact alone. And please call me James. We're family now, apparently. James, then, and I'm Adrian. He gestured toward the villa. Please, come inside. You must be exhausted. Clara watched her father take in the villa's interior with the same careful assessment he'd given Adrian, noting the expensive furnishings, the original artwork, the tasteful opulence that screamed old money, even though Adrian's fortune was anything but. When they reached the sitting room overlooking the sea, her father stopped, staring at the view. It's beautiful, he said quietly. I can see why you'd want to stay here. It's not about the villa, Dad, or the money, or any of this. Clara moved to stand beside him at the window. It's about him, about what we're building together. Show me. So Clara did. Over the next hour, she walked her father through the foundation work, the grants they'd approved, the families they'd helped, the systems she was building to make sure the money reached people who actually needed it. Her father listened with the focused attention that had always made Clara feel seen, asking thoughtful questions, pushing back on assumptions, helping her think through challenges she hadn't fully considered. Adrian excused himself halfway through, giving them privacy, but not before Clara caught the look of pride on his face as he listened to her explain her vision. When her father finally sat back, studying her with that unreadable expression she remembered from childhood, Clara braced herself. You love him, her father said. It wasn't a question. I think so, yes, which is insane given how this started, but it's not insane, it's human. Her father reached for her hand. Your mother and I started as a blind date neither of us wanted. She thought I was too serious. I thought she was too flighty. We spent the entire first date arguing about politics. When I dropped her off, I was convinced I'd never see her again. But you did. Because she called me 3 days later and told me I was wrong about everything, but she'd enjoyed arguing with me and wanted to do it again. And we did. For 40 years. Until she died. We argued and loved and built a life that didn't make sense to anyone but us. Her father squeezed her hand. What you have with Adrian, it might have started as a transaction, but that's not what it is anymore. I can see it in how he looks at you, how you talk about him when you think I'm not paying attention. That's not obligation, Clara. That's partnership. You're not disappointed that I married someone like him? Someone like him? You mean someone powerful who uses that power to help people? Someone who gave my daughter a purpose she was missing? Someone who clearly adores her and would burn down the world to keep her safe? Her father smiled. No, sweetheart, I'm not disappointed. I'm relieved, because for the first time in years, you look like you're living instead of just surviving. Clara felt tears threaten, the relief so overwhelming it was almost painful. She'd been so afraid of her father's judgment, so worried that he'd see this choice as a betrayal of everything he'd taught her. Instead, he saw what she was only beginning to admit to herself, that she'd found something real in the most unlikely place imaginable. Adrian reappeared in the doorway, reading the emotional moment with his usual precision. Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. James, I've prepared the guest suite on the first floor. I thought stairs might be difficult. But if you'd prefer something upstairs with a better view, first floor is perfect. Thank you. Her father stood, moving with the careful deliberation of someone managing constant pain. I'd like to rest a bit before dinner, if that's all right. Of course. Clara can show you to your room. Clara led her father through the villa, pointing out details, telling stories about the past few weeks, filling the silence with words because she was afraid of what might rush in if she stopped talking. When they reached the guest suite, a beautiful room with its own terrace overlooking the garden, her father turned to her with an expression she couldn't quite read. He's done terrible things, hasn't he? Your husband. Clara wouldn't insult her father's intelligence by lying. Yes. And you know what those things are? The full extent? Most of it, I think. He's been honest with me, even when the truth made him look like a monster. And you can live with that? With knowing what he's capable of? Clara thought about the question carefully before answering. I don't know if I can live with it long term. What I know is that I'm trying. That I'm pushing him to be better, to look for alternatives when they exist. That I'm using his resources to help people, which feels like it means something even if it doesn't erase the harm he's caused. She met her father's eyes. I know it's not a perfect answer, but it's the honest one. Then that's good enough for me. Her father kissed her forehead. Now go. Spend some time with your husband. I'm fine here. Clara found Adrian in the kitchen, cooking again despite having staff who could handle dinner. He looked up when she entered, his hands covered in flour, his sleeves rolled up, looking more relaxed than she'd seen him since her father's arrival was announced. How is he? Adrian asked. Good. Tired, but good. He likes you, I think, or at least he doesn't hate you, which is probably the best we could hope for given the circumstances. Clara moved to stand beside him at the counter. What are you making? Pelmeni. Russian dumplings. My grandmother's recipe. Adrian's hands moved with practiced efficiency, shaping the dough. I thought your father might appreciate home cooking instead of something fancy from the chef. You're nervous. Terrified, actually. Your father's opinion matters to you, which means it matters to me. Adrian glanced at her. What did he say? When you were alone? That he thinks we're building something real. That he's relieved I'm happy. That he's not disappointed in my choice. Clara picked up a piece of dough, trying to mimic Adrian's movements. I'm making this wrong, aren't I? Completely. Here. Adrian moved behind her, his hands covering hers, guiding the movement. Like this. Firm but gentle. You're trying to seal it, not strangle it. They worked together in comfortable silence, Clara gradually improving her technique under Adrian's patient instruction. It felt domestic and normal, and nothing like what she'd imagined her life would be 3 months ago. When the dumplings were formed and ready to cook, Adrian turned her in his arms, flour transferring from his hands to her dress. I love you, he said, the words simple and direct. I know I've said it before, but I need you to know I mean it. Not because you're convenient or beautiful or good for my image, but because you make me want to be better than I am. Because you challenge me and push back and refuse to let me hide behind justifications. Because when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to be human instead of just a collection of calculated decisions. Clara's breath caught. They'd been dancing around these words for weeks, both of them afraid to say what they felt too clearly. But hearing Adrian say it now, with flour on his hands and vulnerability in his eyes, felt like something shifting into place. I love you too, she said, and was surprised by how easy the words were. I'm still figuring out what that means, what it looks like in practice. But I know it's real. That's all I need. Real, honest, no pretense. Adrian kissed her softly. Everything else we can figure out as we go. Dinner was a surprisingly relaxed affair. Clara's father and Adrian discovered a shared love of chess, spending an hour after the meal playing while Clara watched from the couch, occasionally offering commentary that both men ignored. Watching them together, her past and her present, the man who'd raised her and the man she'd chosen, felt surreal and right in equal measure. When her father finally retired for the night, pleading exhaustion, Clara and Adrian retreated to their bedroom. Clara stood on the balcony, watching the moon paint silver patterns on the dark water, feeling Adrian's presence behind her before his arms came around her waist. That went well, he said. Better than I dared hope. He really likes you, Adrian. I could tell. The feeling is mutual. He's a good man. You can see where you got your strength from. Adrian was quiet for a moment, then said, There's something I need to tell you. Something that's going to happen tomorrow that you should know about. Clara tensed. There it was, the other shoe she'd been waiting for. What? Castellano is dead. His son found him this morning. Apparent heart attack, though given his age and health issues, it's not surprising. But you don't think it was natural? I don't know. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. What matters is that his death creates a power vacuum in central Italy. His organization will fracture, different factions fighting for control. And Adrian's grip tightened slightly. We're going to be right in the middle of it. Clara turned in his arms. What does that mean for us? It means the next few months are going to be dangerous. Different groups will try to make alliances, test boundaries, see if they can take territory that Castellano held. It means I'll need to spend more time handling business, less time here. It means increased security, more guards, stricter protocols. It means our peaceful honeymoon period is over. Yes. Adrian cupped her face in his hands. I won't lie to you, Clara. This is what I meant when I said my world is always dangerous. People die, Power shifts, and everything you think is stable can change overnight. I can protect you. I will protect you. But I can't shield you from the reality that being married to me makes you a target. Clara felt fear spike through her, cold and sharp. This was it. The reality check she'd known was coming. The reminder that choosing Adrian meant choosing a life where violence was always lurking just beneath the civilized surface. I'm scared, she admitted. Good. Fear will keep you alert, keep you careful. But Clara, Adrian's gray eyes held hers with intensity. I need to know you're still with me, that this hasn't changed your decision. Because if you want out, if this is too much, I'll arrange it. New identity, new life. Everything you need to disappear. Your father, too. I'll make sure both of you are taken care of, far from my world and the dangers that come with it. It was the same offer he'd made before, the escape route he kept open even now. Clara could take it, could protect her father and herself, could return to some version of her old life, could choose safety over the terrifying uncertainty of staying. But she'd meant what she said when she chose to stay the first time. She wasn't doing this halfway. I'm not leaving, Clara said firmly. I'm scared, and I'm going to need you to help me understand how to stay safe. But I'm not running. We're partners, Adrian, which means when your world gets dangerous, we face it together. Relief and love and something fiercer washed across Adrian's face. Then we start your real training tomorrow. No more gentle introductions. You learn to protect yourself, to read threats, to survive in my world. Okay, but tonight, Clara pulled him toward the bedroom. Tonight we just exist. No danger, no planning, just us. They made love slowly, tenderly, with the desperation of two people who knew their peaceful interlude was ending. When they finally fell asleep tangled together, Clara's last thought was that she'd made her choice, and now she'd live with the consequences. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. The next morning brought the first real test of that promise. Clara woke to find Adrian already gone, Marcus standing in the doorway with an expression that suggested the news he carried was serious. Mrs. Volkov, Mr. Volkov asked me to inform you that there's been an incident. He's handling it now, but he wanted you to stay in the villa with your father until he returns. What kind of incident? Marcus hesitated, clearly weighing how much to tell her. One of Castellano's lieutenants made a move on our Naples warehouse. Mr. Volkov is dealing with it personally. Is he safe? He has 20 men with him. He's as safe as he can be in this situation. Marcus's expression softened slightly. He'll be fine, Mrs. Volkov. This is what he does. Clara nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. This was her life now. Mornings where her husband left to handle violent business while she waited at home, trying not to imagine all the ways things could go wrong. She dressed quickly, finding her father already awake in the garden, looking stronger than he had the night before. Adrian had to leave, Clara said without preamble. Business situation, possibly dangerous. Her father set down his coffee. And you're terrified. Completely. Come here. He patted the bench beside him, and Clara sat, leaning against his shoulder the way she had as a child. Your mother used to do this when I was deployed. Sit and worry and try to act like she was fine, even though she was imagining every possible worst-case scenario. How did she handle it? She built a life that didn't revolve around waiting. She had her friends, her work, her passions. She made sure that when I came home, I was coming home to a partner who'd been living her own full life, not a wife who'd just been counting down the hours until my return. Her father squeezed her shoulder. That's what you need to do, Clara. Build something that's yours, not just the foundation, though that's a good start, but a complete life that exists whether Adrian is here or not. I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You're the strongest person I know. You've just been too busy surviving to realize it. Her father kissed the top of her head. So stop surviving and start living. Really living. Make this life yours, Clara. On your terms. The words stayed with Clara throughout the long day of waiting. She threw herself into foundation work, reviewing applications, making calls, building the infrastructure that would help people long after she was gone. When Adrian finally returned late that afternoon, exhausted but unhurt, Clara didn't fall apart with relief. Instead, she asked him what had happened, listened to his explanation of the confrontation and its resolution, and then told him about the 3 new grants she'd approved and the partnership she was building with a hospital in Naples. Adrian listened with the focused attention he always gave her, and when she finished, he smiled. "You're building your own empire," he said with obvious pride. "Just a small one, and a lot less violent than yours. The best kind." Over the following weeks, they settled into a new rhythm. Adrian handled the fallout from Castellano's death, negotiating, threatening, occasionally resorting to violence when negotiation failed. Clara built her foundation, helped families in crisis, and slowly transformed from Adrian's wife into a power in her own right. People started seeking her out directly, asking for help, treating her as someone with authority independent of her husband. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. The real test came 6 weeks after her father's visit. Clara was in her office. Adrian had given her one of the villa's rooms to use as her foundation headquarters when Marcus appeared with an expression that sent ice through her veins. "Mrs. Volkov, we have a situation. Someone took your father." Clara's world stopped. "What?" "He was at the hospital for his treatment. Someone grabbed him from the parking lot. Professional job. They knew his schedule, his security detail, everything." "Where's Adrian?" "On his way back from Rome. He'll be here in 2 hours, but Mrs. Volkov..." Marcus pulled out his phone, showing her a message. "They're not waiting that long. They want you to meet them, alone, in 1 hour, or your father dies." Clara's mind went blank with terror for exactly 5 seconds. Then something cold and clear took over. The survival instinct that had gotten her through poverty and loss, and 3 months married to a criminal. She looked at Marcus with steady eyes. "Who are they?" "We think it's one of Castellano's nephews, trying to make a name for himself by hitting Adrian where it hurts." Marcus's expression was grim. "You can't go, Mrs. Volkov. It's a trap. They'll kill you and your father both." "Maybe. Or maybe they actually want to negotiate and using my father gives them leverage." Claire's mind raced through possibilities. "Can you track my phone?" "Of course." "Then I'm going, but I'm going with backup at a distance. They want me alone, so that's what they'll see. But you and your team follow and be ready to move if things go wrong." "Mr. Volkov will kill me if I let you do this." "Mr. Volkov isn't here. I am, and that's my father they're holding, Marcus. I'm not letting him die because I was too scared to act." Clara stood, smoothing her dress with hands that only shook slightly. "Now tell me where they want me to go, and let's plan how to keep me alive long enough for Adrian to show up and turn these idiots into a cautionary tale." Marcus stared at her for a long moment, clearly reassessing everything he thought he knew about Adrian Volkov's quiet American wife. Then he nodded sharply. "Yes, ma'am. Let's go save your father." The meeting location was an abandoned factory on the outskirts of Naples, the kind of place where bad things happened in movies. Clara drove herself, following Marcus's instructions, her heart pounding, but her hands steady on the wheel. She could do this. She'd survived everything life had thrown at her so far. She could survive this too. When she arrived, she found her father tied to a chair in the center of the empty factory floor, surrounded by 5 armed men. The one in charge was young, maybe 30, with the kind of cocky arrogance that suggested he thought he was smarter than he actually was. "Mrs. Volkov, so nice of you to join us," he gestured to her father. "As you can see, your father is alive. For now. Let him go." Clara kept her voice steady, channeling every ounce of strength she possessed. "Whatever point you're trying to make, he's not part of this." "Oh, but he is. He's the reason your husband agreed to marry you, yes? The sick father who needed expensive treatment? That makes him leverage." The young man, she didn't even know his name, which somehow made this worse, circled her slowly. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call your husband and tell him to cede control of all of Castellano's former territory to me. In exchange, I let you and Daddy Dearest go free. And if I refuse, then I kill your father in front of you. Then I kill you. Then I send the video to your husband and watch his empire crumble while he grieves." The young man smiled. "It's a good plan, yes?" "It's a terrible plan, actually." Clara kept her voice calm, even as her mind raced. "Because you're operating on the assumption that Adrian values my father and me more than his territory. But what if you're wrong? What if he's perfectly willing to let us die rather than show weakness?" A flicker of doubt crossed the young man's face. "Good." Clara pressed her advantage. "You don't know him the way I do. You think he's soft because he married an American waitress. You think love makes him weak, but it doesn't. It makes him terrifying because now he has something to protect, which means he'll go further, be more ruthless, destroy more completely than he ever would have before. Clara took a step closer, using her fear as fuel. So go ahead, call him, make your demands, and then spend the rest of your very short life regretting it when he burns down everything you've ever cared about in retaliation. You're bluffing. Am I? You took his wife, his father-in-law. You think there's any amount of territory worth what he's going to do to you? Clara smiled, and she knew it looked wrong, knew the fear and adrenaline were twisting it into something dangerous. You've already lost. You just don't know it yet. The factory's far door exploded inward. Adrian strode through the smoke and chaos with Marcus and a dozen armed men flanking him, and the look on his face was the most terrifying thing Clara had ever seen. This wasn't the man who cooked her dinner or made love to her tenderly. This was the criminal who'd clawed his way to power through intelligence and ruthlessness, and he'd come for blood. Let them go, Adrian said, his voice eerily calm. Now, and I'll make your death quick. The young man grabbed Clara, pressing a gun to her head with shaking hands. Stay back or I'll kill her. No, you won't. Adrian didn't even slow down. Because if you hurt her, there won't be anywhere in the world you can hide. I will find everyone you've ever loved, and I will make them scream. I will erase every trace that you ever existed. I will turn your name into a warning that parents tell their children about what happens when you're stupid enough to touch what's mine. Clara felt the gun against her temple, felt the young man's hands shaking, and she made a decision. She'd spent 3 months learning to read violence, to understand threat displays versus real danger. And this was a scared kid who'd gambled everything on a bluff and lost. She drove her elbow back into his solar plexus exactly like Marcus had taught her, dropping low as the gun discharged harmlessly into the ceiling. Adrian was there in an instant, disarming the young man with brutal efficiency before his men swarmed the others. And then Clara was in Adrian's arms, his hands running over her frantically, checking for injuries, his composure finally cracking. Are you hurt? Did they touch you? Clara, talk to me. I'm fine. I'm okay. But my father... Marcus was already cutting her father free, helping him to his feet. James looked pale and shaken but unharmed, and when he met Clara's eyes across the factory floor, there was pride there alongside the fear. Adrian turned to the young man who was on his knees, blood streaming from his nose, clearly realizing the enormity of his mistake. You took my wife, my father-in-law. You threatened everything I care about. Please, I'm sorry. It was a mistake. Yes, it was. A fatal one. Adrian's voice carried no anger, just cold certainty. But not for the reason you think. You're going to live, because my wife is standing right there, and I'm not making her watch me kill someone. But you're going to leave Italy tonight. You're going to disappear so completely that even I won't be able to find you. And if I ever hear your name again, if you ever come near my family again, I will forget my mercy, and remember only that you put a gun to my wife's head. The young man nodded frantically, scrambling away when Marcus hauled him to his feet. Within minutes, the factory was clear except for Clara, Adrian, her father, and the security team. Clara should have been terrified, should have been traumatized by having a gun to her head, by witnessing Adrian's cold rage, by the violence that had almost erupted. Instead, she felt calm, clear, like she'd passed some kind of test and emerged on the other side fundamentally changed. You came for me, she said to Adrian, always, every time, no matter what. He pulled her close, his heart racing against her chest. When Marcus called and said they'd taken you, I've never been that scared in my life, Clara. I thought I'd lost you. I thought I'd have to live in a world where you didn't exist anymore. But you didn't lose me. I'm right here. We're both fine. Clara pulled back enough to look at him. And I saved myself, or started to anyway. Like you've been teaching me. Something like pride broke through Adrian's fear. You were magnificent, absolutely terrifying. I've never seen anyone talk their way out of a hostage situation before. I learned from the best. They drove back to the villa in convoy, Clara's father in the car with them, all three processing what had just happened in their own ways. When they finally arrived home, her father asked to speak with Adrian privately. Clara watched them disappear into Adrian's office, wondering what her father would say, whether he'd demand she leave this dangerous life now that he'd seen its reality firsthand. When they emerged 20 minutes later, both men looked serious but not angry. Her father hugged Clara tightly. "I'm going back to New York tomorrow," he said. "The treatment is working, but I need to continue it there. And you," he cupped her face, "you need to build your life here without worrying about me." "Dad, I'm proud of you, Clara, for your strength today, for the life you're building, for choosing love even when it's complicated and scary. Your mother would be proud too." He glanced at Adrian. "Take care of my daughter. She's stronger than either of us gave her credit for, but she still deserves someone in her corner." "Always," Adrian promised. "You have my word." After her father went to bed, Clara and Adrian sat on their balcony, processing the day's events in the darkness. Clara's hands had finally started shaking, the adrenaline wearing off and leaving exhaustion in its wake. "I could have died today," she said quietly, "but you didn't. You were smart and brave, and you survived. What if next time I'm not smart enough? What if next time, then we deal with it together? But Clarice," Adrian took her trembling hands in his steady ones, "you can't live in fear of what might happen. You can only live in the reality of what is. And what is that you're alive, you're safe, and you proved today that you can handle yourself in my world." Clara leaned against him, letting his solid presence ground her. "I don't want to do that again." "Hopefully you won't have to. That kind of stupidity is rare even in my world. Most people are smart enough not to target family directly." Adrian kissed her temple. "But if it does happen again, I know you'll handle it, and I'll always come for you. Always." The weeks that followed brought a strange peace. Word spread about the attempted kidnapping and Adrian's response, and it seemed to settle something in the criminal underworld's collective understanding. Clara Volkov wasn't just the crime lord's wife. She was under his protection in ways that made her effectively untouchable. Clara used that protection to expand her foundation's reach. She hired staff, built partnerships with hospitals and schools, created systems that would outlast her. She became known in Naples and beyond as someone who helped people, who used her husband's money and power for good. It didn't erase the harm Adrian's business caused, but it felt like it meant something. 6 months after she'd chosen to stay, Clara stood on the balcony watching the sunset and realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd thought about her old life. Not with longing or regret, anyway, just as something that had happened to a different version of herself. Someone smaller and more scared who hadn't known what she was capable of. Adrian found her there, as he always did, his arms sliding around her waist from behind. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How far we've come. How different everything is from what I imagined when I first agreed to marry you." Clara turned in his arms. "I thought I was selling myself to save my father, but I think maybe I was actually saving myself and I just didn't know it yet." "How do you mean?" "I was so small in my old life. So convinced that survival was the best I could hope for. And then you came along and offered me something bigger and scarier and more complicated than I'd ever imagined, and it terrified me. But it woke something up. Made me realize I was capable of more than I thought." "You were always capable of it. You just needed the right circumstances to discover it." Clara kissed him softly. "Thank you for seeing that in me before I saw it in myself. For giving me the choice to stay even when it hurt you to offer it. For building this life with me. Thank you for choosing me. For seeing past what I do to who I am. For making me want to be better." Adrian's expression turned serious. "There's something I want to talk to you about, something I've been planning." "Should I be worried?" "I don't think so. I hope not." Adrian took her hand, leading her inside to his office. He pulled out a folder, handing it to her. "I'm legitimizing. Not everything, not all at once, but I'm transitioning the business, moving money into legal enterprises, building real companies that don't depend on criminal activity. It's going to take years, maybe a decade, but eventually I want to leave this life behind completely." Clara stared at the documents, barely able to process what she was seeing. Business plans, incorporation papers, investment strategies, all pointing toward a future where Adrian Volkov was a legitimate businessman instead of a criminal. "Why?" she asked. "Because I want to build a life with you that isn't defined by looking over our shoulders. Because I want our children, if we have them, to inherit something clean. Because you make me want to be the man you see when you look at me, not the man I've been. Adrian watched her face carefully. This doesn't mean I'm going soft. The transition will be dangerous, will require careful management, but it means that eventually, maybe, we can have something close to a normal life. Clara set down the folder, her hands shaking slightly. Children? If you want them. I know we've never discussed it. I know it might not be something you want given everything, but yes. I'd like to have a family with you, build something that outlasts us both. I want that too, Clara heard herself say, and realized it was true. She wanted to build a family with this complicated, dangerous, surprisingly tender man. She wanted to take all the broken pieces of how they'd started and forge something beautiful from them. But not yet. I want to establish the foundation fully first. I want to make sure we're moving toward legitimate business before we bring children into this world. Can you live with that? I can live with anything as long as you're beside me. They stood together in Adrian's office, planning a future that had seemed impossible 6 months ago. And Clara realized that this was what happiness looked like. Not the absence of fear or complication, but the presence of partnership. The knowledge that whatever challenges came, they'd face them together. A year later, Clara stood in the grand ballroom of a Naples hotel, surrounded by the people whose lives her foundation had changed. Her father sat in the front row, his cancer in remission, his eyes bright with pride as he watched his daughter give a speech about the importance of helping those who'd fallen through society's cracks. Adrian stood in the back, Marcus beside him, watching his wife command the room with a confidence that had grown exponentially over the past year. She'd become a force in her own right, someone people sought out not because she was married to Adrian Volkov, but because Clara Volkov had built something meaningful. After the event, they drove back to the villa through the Italian night. Clara leaned against Adrian's shoulder, exhausted but satisfied. "Your father looked good," Adrian said. "The treatment is working. The doctors are optimistic he might have years, not months." Clara smiled. "He's talking about moving here. Says he wants to be close to his grandchildren when we eventually have them. We told him we're waiting." "I know, but he's an optimist." Clara paused, then said, "Adrian, I think I'm ready. Not right now, but soon. To start trying for a family." Adrian's hand tightened on hers. "Are you sure?" "No, but I don't think I'll ever be completely sure about anything in this life. What I am is happy, and loved, and ready to build something even bigger than what we have." She looked up at him. "You've kept your promise. You're transitioning the business, legitimizing everything you can. And I've built something I'm proud of. So yes, I'm ready for the next chapter." "Then let's start writing it, together." When they reached the villa, Clara stood on their balcony one last time, looking out at the view that had once felt like a prison and now felt like home. She thought about the scared woman who'd married a stranger for money, who'd planned her escape, who'd stood in this exact spot wondering if she could survive the choice she'd made. That woman had survived. More than that, she'd thrived. She'd found love in the most unlikely place, built meaning from chaos, transformed herself into someone stronger and braver than she'd ever imagined possible. Adrian joined her, his arms coming around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "No regrets?" he asked, the same question he'd asked a year ago. Clara thought about everything that had led to this moment. The desperation, the fear, the impossible choice that had changed everything. She thought about the violence she'd witnessed, the moral compromises she'd made, the complicated reality of loving a man who operated outside the law. And she thought about the foundation that had helped hundreds of families, the partnership she'd built with a man who saw her as an equal, the future they were planning together, one that held hope for something better. "No regrets," Clara said, and meant it completely. They stood together on the balcony as the sun rose over the Amalfi coast, painting the world in shades of gold and promise. Clara Bennett had married Adrian Volkov out of desperation and necessity. But Clara Volkov had chosen to stay out of love and hope, and the wild, terrifying possibility that two broken people could build something extraordinary together. She'd started as a prisoner in a gilded cage. She'd become a partner in an empire. And now, looking toward a future full of uncertainty and promise in equal measure, she was ready to become something even more. A woman who'd faced her fears and chosen to build a life that was entirely her own, even if she was sharing it with someone else. The cage had become a home, the captor had become a partner, and the impossible bargain had become a love story after all. Just not the kind anyone would have expected. And that, Clara decided, was perfect.